Graham Gill, the chair of the Finance, Economic Development, Corporate Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My vice chairman today will be Councillor Judy Stevens, who is the chair of the Culture and Visitor Economy Overview and Scrutiny Committee. If everyone can set mobile phones to silent, please. We'll go to the agenda. Item 1, are there any apologies for absence? Amy.
Thank you. We've received apologies from Councillor Amanda Wheeler, Councillor David Bellamy, Councillor Susan Sandal and Councillor Julie Smith. Councillor Ashley Baxter is substituting for Councillor Amanda Wheeler. Councillor Hilary Westrop is substituting for Councillor David Bellamy. Councillor Helen Crawford is substituting for Judy Smith. And Councillor Kathy Rice Oxley is substituting for Councillor Susan Sandal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any, item 2, are there any declarations of interest? Or Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Just before you get to that, can I raise a point of order, which is that the agenda that I looked at, when I looked for the agenda 5 working days before the meeting, there was no agenda. When I looked 4 days before the working meeting, there was an agenda on the website, but it wasn't this one. So can I ask, when was the previous agenda withdrawn and why isn't it still on the website? And can I just clarify that we are working to this one that I eventually received today?
So thank you for that, Councillor Baxter. There was a process in setting up the agenda. The agenda was published before it was ready. If there's somebody from Democratic Services that can comment on that, but we are working to the paper agenda. Alan.
Yeah, so there was a requirement to send out an agenda in time to summons everybody to the meeting, the number of working days in advance of the meeting. Since then, there have been some changes and amendments made to that, but everybody should have the current agenda, and the one that you're talking about there is the one that we're working on, Councillor Baxter. So thanks for raising that.
So just to follow up on that, if we publish an agenda and then withdraw it, I think the process should be, since it's in the public domain, that we put the agenda in the public domain, and if we revise it, then we publish a revised agenda. Otherwise, we could change the agenda right up until a moment before the meeting, and we're all working to the wrong agenda rather than just me. I think that the original agenda should stay in the public domain.
Okay, thank you for that point of order. Alan, can you just comment on the protocol for changing the agendas before the meeting?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Gill. So my view is the key part of the agenda is to get that notice out so that people are aware they've been summoned to the meeting. That's where the clear days come. In terms of what the agenda's changed, that can happen at the discretion of the chairman. So, and that is why, as I understand what's happened.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on. Item 2, declarations of interest or dispensations. Are there any declarations of interest or dispensations in the room?
Mr. Chairman, before we move on to that, can we just be clear that we are discussing today a revised agenda? It is revised. That's a fact.
That's already been established.
And it should be recorded,
yes.
you know.
The agenda was revised. That has been established. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest or dispensations in the room? Councillor Baxter.
As usual, but less so now. I have been a user of the Deepens Leisure Centre, and my family continue to be members of the Deepens Swimming Club, but that's neither pecuniary nor disclosable. I'm just saying it for the people's information.
Councillor Dilks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deepens Leisure Centre is located in the council ward where I live, and I'm privileged to be elected to represent on this council. As well as that, I'm a long-time parish councillor, which has got an interest in the leisure centre. And since May this year, elected county councillor for Deepings East, which covers Deeping St James, Langtops and part of Market Deeping. As well as declaring those interests, I should say that I'm a resident of Deeping St James. I held a family membership of Deepings Leisure Centre when there was such a thing, and have been an occasional user of the centre for over 40 years. Thank you.
Grateful for that. Are there any other declarations of interest? Councillor Baxter, is it different to the original, to the first declaration? Okay, Councillor Baxter.
For avoidance of doubt, and as prescribed by the Constitution, can you just clarify whether anybody in this room is subject to any party whip?
Well, that is not really a question for myself as the chair. I'm not aware of a party whip. That is not really a question for me as the chair. Is that a question for me, or is that a question for somebody else?
Yes, it says in the Constitution that if anybody is whipped, then they need to declare that at the beginning of the overview scrutiny committee. So, I mean, if nobody is whipped, that's no problem. But I would invite you to invite people to declare a whip if they're whipped.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. As the Conservative Group Leader, no, there is not a whip on this. And I don't know if the Deputy Leader of the Independent Group has also got a whip on, if you could clarify.
No, we have no whips.
Okay, so are there any other declarations of interest in the room? There doesn't appear to be, so I'm going to move on. And usually on this joint scrutiny committee, we've been contacted by several members of the public who are going to speak on this issue. We have a list of 5 that have pre-registered to speak on this. As a reminder, thank you for anybody that has engaged with us to speak on today's agenda. We have a lot of business to get through today, so I would ask you to keep your comments to a maximum of 3 minutes, and there'll be a reminder with 10 seconds to go that you have 10 seconds to wrap up your comments. Councillor Dilks.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered if you're proposing to run through the order of proceedings within the meeting, particularly on item 4. Shall I say what my concern is, if I may?
Perhaps if we save that until we get to item 4, I think that might be more helpful. Thank you for that, Councillor Dilks. So the first member of the public that we have to speak is Eileen Gray. Can I call Eileen Gray, please? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not used to public speaking, but I am resident of Market Deeping, a long-term user of the Deepings Leisure Centre, some 40-odd years. Now, in July, when this leisure centre closed because of maladministration or negligence, which I was led to believe, my 40 years of my life was taken away from me. I have used that leisure centre as a member of staff, a teacher, a member of the Life Saving Club, an instructor in the Life Saving Club, and many other avenues. I am just absolutely heartbroken that this has happened. I swim for an hour a day, or I do now, but I've gone over to the other county, Spalding. When you get an amputee, a octogenarian, a lady in remission from cancer, a respite lady, respite for an hour from her partner who is suffering cancer. You've got a channel swimmer, you've got an Olympic swimmer, medalist, you've got the swimming club. Why are all these people being denied this facility? Perhaps you'll tell me. Anybody know? Anybody got any answers to this?
Mrs. Gray, today's the public speaking is not a dialogue; it is a statement from members of the public. If you'd like to continue.
I've nothing further to say. It's just that I'm absolutely heartbroken by what's happened.
I'm really grateful for your comments today. Thank you for that, Mrs. Gray. If I can call the next speaker, please, Mr. Jack Little. Thank you, Mr. Little. 3 minutes. Thank you.
Chairman, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak here at this meeting. I'm a resident of Deeping St James, have been for the last decade, and through sport alongside grandsons, I've enjoyed the facilities during that time. Now, sadly, since 2013, there has been a dialogue and virtually zero action regarding a replacement leisure centre. I am pleased, however, that today there are positive options on the table, and I would implore councillors to select option 3 as the best investment for the future for this next 25 years. Option 2+ may seem like a nice option because it's a couple of £1 million less. However, we know that in 20 years' time, you will need to get a plan in place for a new leisure centre, and I hope to still be around for when that happens. I myself have spent a lifetime in sport from the age of 7 and until now, and including now, both as a participant, a competitor, a coach, a member of various club committees. It is vitally important that this facility is made available again as soon as is humanly possible. And I see that you've set some target dates, which is good. And I also am very pleased to see that the 3G project application with the Football Foundation is also contained within the papers, as that facility is direly required. I know for a fact the team that my grandson played for until 2 weeks ago, there are players leaving left, right and centre to go to other town teams because they have the training facilities available, all-weather training facilities available with floodlights. I also note that a core part of what is being proposed is pending on an agreed lease with the Anthem schools. And I do hope, and I see that there is a heads of terms has been tentatively agreed, but that is something that you must take incredibly seriously, as for almost 7 years, there have been attempts to lease with Anthem schools without success. So everything else in that paper is a waste of time unless you've got that agreement. And also there's a very clear situation as to who will actually run the leisure centre and the football fields, sports fields, when that is concluded, because it doesn't actually state that in the document. Is it going to be Leisure SK or is it going to be Anthem schools? So I look forward to...
Mr. Little, that is 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you. I look forward to the deliberations and implore you to make the right decisions.
Mr. Little, I'm grateful for your comments today. Thank you for coming today. The next speaker is Mr. Peter Gray.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, you recognise the similarity in the name with one of the previous speakers. Well, I'm actually a husband plus a carer. I'd like to just pick up a little bit from where she left off. And one of the things sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. One of the things I would like to say is that all the 3 options that have been thrown into the arena are all really a distraction from what's going on, you know, because what it does is tends to divide and conquer people, doesn't it? Because you get different views coming through. Now, initially, I was thinking on the lines that let's get the leisure centre repaired. That's the most important thing because it's needed now. In hindsight, I thought perhaps maybe I was being a bit unreasonable and I was thinking it from a very selfish point of view, i.e. I'm in my 75th year and I use the leisure centre, or did use it 4 times a week for an hour using the swimming pool. But of course, there are other activities that go on there, which are just as important as the swimming, which we tend to be a little bit focused on. But however, I felt a little bit selfish because, you know, being in my 75th year, I haven't got that long to go. And the wait for a new leisure centre is just probably not going to happen. You know, if I look at the statistics, I probably won't be around in 5 years' time, particularly with COVID on. So I think that's a key issue, which I needed to think about personally. But of course, it's not just me. There's a lot of kids in the swimming club, particularly, you know, they've got about a 3-year gap. They come on song, they start to blossom forth, budding Olympic athletes, perhaps indeed. Some of them have and actually made it. They have from about 15 years old where they're recognised as being good and probably up to 18 where they go to university.
30
so they
seconds.
only have a 3-year window in which to get the best training they possibly can, which is absolutely excellent at Deeping. One of the best in the county, I would suggest, reflected only by the results that they've achieved. And in my very short space of time, one thing I noticed is that Leisure SK is a private limited company. And I also noticed that there are several councillors on as directors. Now, we've had no reports from these directors, and I'm very concerned about the lack of disclosure that we get from private limited companies. And I think this is a serious issue.
Mr. Gray, that's time. If you can bring your points to a conclusion.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that what is happening is illegal, but what I'm saying is it's immoral.
Your comments are noted. Thank you for that, Mr. Gray. Moving on, Mr. Robbie Tyler, please.
Thank you very much. So I've been in part of Deeping all my life. I'm a martial arts instructor, personal trainer and fitness instructor, so heavily involved in the leisure industry. Obviously, with the closure of the Deeping Leisure Centre, it's impacted our club massively. We would train sort of 2 or 3 classes a night, Monday to Friday. We'd have gradings, we'd have seminars, other things going on all throughout the year. And obviously, without it, we can't do a lot of those things. We've been a little bit fortunate that we've been able to find a small space to sort of continue the classes, but not to the same level as we were before. You know, we've had a lot of students that have made it to sort of world championship level, winning medals in America, and those opportunities are going to start sort of dropping back if we don't get something soon. We're not the only club that's been affected, and I know of another 6 martial arts clubs, a tennis club, gymnastics club, football club. Many other clubs that use that leisure centre, that some of them at the moment aren't running because they can't find a space. Some of them have had to relocate to other areas. Some are using Bourne, Peterborough. So you're drawing stuff away from the deep ends. We're losing opportunities in this area. And with the upkeep of the leisure centre as it was before, there's a lot of things that we lost as well. There's things like an indoor cricket club that got lost over the years. There was 5-a-side football that got lost, squash clubs that got lost, all because of the poor upkeep of the leisure centre. So not only is there a whole host of things that are ready to use something now, there's potential for other things to come back to the Deepings and be used in the future. So the quicker we can get something done, the better, really, because a lot of us are being impacted here and now. Obviously, I've only mentioned things that only use the halls. You've got the swimming pool as well. That's a massive swimming club in itself, and they've had to sort of relocate to other areas. So just a lot of opportunities that have been missed, and the people of the Deepings are crying out for it. I mean, I was from being sort of training from 6 years old in that leisure centre. I was probably at the leisure centre more then than I was at home. You know, So it's a massive loss for a lot of us, young, old, you know, it doesn't really matter. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mr. Tyler. I appreciate your comments. We are now moving, if the technology will permit, to Mr. Simon, sorry, Hoppy, who is on Zoom. Mr. Hoppy, I believe you're not on mute anymore, so you should be available to talk. Mr. Hoppy? I think he's on mute. Okay, unfortunately, I am going to have to move on. No, I don't think Mr. Hoppy is. I think the technology may be working against us. Okay, I'd like to thank all of the members of the public for contributing today. That helps frame our discussion. And back to the agenda, I'd like to move on to item 4. Before we make this start, Councillor Dilks, you wanted to comment upon the proposed agenda.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it was just that I welcome the A to H subtitles in there, and it's a logical way forward. But the running order actually doesn't allow consideration of the opportunity offered by the Landis and Gear site, and I wondered if there ought to be an extra one in here somewhere, specifically on that to deal with that.
Okay, thank you for those comments. My Vice Chairman and myself, we have discussed this. We're going to take items A, B and C together. We're going to stop there allowing for debate. In that situation, I believe that you should be able to raise comments and questions about a new leisure provision, new leisure centre. We're then going to take item D on its own. This is the consideration of the leasing arrangements. And then once we pass, we'll take some questions on that. And then the third element will be E, F, G and H, which is where we move on to refurbishment. So we intend to take this in 3 separate areas, allowing members to question those 3 areas. Okay, so if there are no further comments, thank you for that. This is in the... It's in... I think we want to. I think just. Okay, I think there must be a technology issue there because he's unable to unmute himself. So with that, on item 4, I think we're going to have to move forward, make some progress. This is in the hands of Councillor Barry Dobson.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Investing in high quality leisure facilities across the district is a key part of the Council's corporate ambition. Vital to us achieving this ambition is the provision of good quality facilities which meet modern consumer expectation and are sustainable. You will know that I have been the portfolio holder for leisure since January of last year. Since this time, I have been personally committed to delivering on the ambitious leisure improvement plans which this council has previously announced. As part of this work, the Deepings area was prioritised for investment due to the age and condition of the existing leisure centre. Over the course of the last 2 years, a significant amount of work has been undertaken to identify the feasibility of providing a new leisure centre for the Deepings area. The paper before you documents our journey and provides information on each of the schemes considered, together with the resulting impact on the Council's general fund revenue budgets. Whilst a new build for the Deepings area is once possible, this is sadly no longer the case. As a council, we find ourselves in extremely challenging financial times. While some of this is a direct result of reduced funding from central government, the impact of COVID-19 on the council's finances cannot be underestimated. We have seen a drastic reduction in our income, and our reserves have been put under pressure as we have supported our local residents, businesses, and our staff. As a council, we must align our diminished resources for the benefit of all our residents across the district. That being said, due to the temporary closure of the existing leisure centre, the Deepings is currently without any leisure provision. The reasons for this have been well documented. Since the meeting of the council on the 2nd of September, a full range of building and land surveys have been... I'll carry on. Since the meeting of the council on the 2nd of September...
My connection has been dropping in and out, so I sincerely hope...
Make some progress, please, Councillor Dobson.
Yeah. Since the meeting of the council on the 2nd of September, a full range of building and land surveys have taken place on the existing facility, and experts have been commissioned to bring forward options for the refurbishment and the associated business plans. 4 options have been identified, one of which includes a full remodel and refurbishment of the existing centre, which will meet the evidence to need whilst providing residents of the Deepings with a facility which has the look and feel of a new centre. I remain resolute to trying to get the best possible outcome for the Deepings area and would like to personally recommend that you give this option serious consideration today. I do not say this lightly, as a refurbishment of this magnitude and cost will still be a significant undertaking for this council, and any investment approved will require the council to review its spending priorities to account for the cost of borrowing. Of course, no investment will be possible without the council gaining a legal interest in the existing building. And although there has been good progress, there is still work to do in this regard. On the 2nd of September this year, we promised to turn around the options for refurbishment before Christmas, and we have delivered that promise. I'm looking forward to hearing the debate today and the wider views of members on the work which has been undertaken. Thank you, Chair. And I'd like now to introduce Paul Weston, the architect involved, and David Rushton from SLC.
Thank you, Councillor Dobson. Just to introduce myself, it's David Rushton from the Leisure Consultants SLC. We have been working over the last 4 or 5 years with over 150 local authorities, and our sort of specialist area is sport and physical activity and leisure. Key work streams are around feasibility, which arguably covers this particular project, procurement, and strategy. So those, to give you an idea, in the last year we've been involved with 20 business planning projects, either for leisure investment or whole facilities. So the sort of work that we're doing with yourselves is what we do all the time on an ongoing basis. We've worked with South Kesteven now for over 18 months, sort of helping you set up your local authority trading company, also helping you through the COVID crisis in terms of reconciling your contract with the previous operators, One Life. So during that time, we've sort of got a very, very good understanding of your leisure contract and its finances. What I wanted to stress actually is in terms of our approach, when we're producing business plans and business cases, we have access to data on over 150 leisure facilities through various means, through the procurement work that we've done and other projects, which enables us to benchmark costs in particular. But crucially, the way that we project income is not based on space, it's based on community. So we use latent demand modelling for the key income generating areas, which are swimming lessons and health and fitness. So we basically look at what the demand is within a particular catchment area. In the case of Deepings, we were looking at 20 minutes. That also takes into account the demographics of the area and those people who are predisposed to actually taking part in sport and physical activity in leisure centres. So when you're looking at our figures, they've been generated on the income side on the basis of demand and projected demand, and on the expenditure side, zero-based, but using benchmarks from other facilities. That's very sort of important to note. Another thing about the business plans that we're doing, we are very much taking into consideration COVID, because the crisis and its impact on leisure service is still with us. At the moment, nationally, Sports England data shows that we're at 74% recovery from pre-COVID income levels, which sounds quite good, but actually, if it continues on that way, from a financial point of view, it's catastrophic for the leisure industry because margins are very small, costs are high. So sort of being only recovering 74% of the income is going to mean, if it carries on, more facilities might have to close nationally. So when we've been doing projections, we've been thinking differently to we were pre-COVID in terms of the return and the likely demand and income. So we've been quite prudent and conservative because we're a long way away from being out of this COVID crisis, as you all know. I think we've presented a multitude of options based on complete new build and various options for refurbishment at the existing centre. I think probably what our sort of overline recommendation from this meeting is the council needs to kind of arrive at a point of affordability and understanding what it can actually afford, because there's kind of no point in debating a £22 million capital solution if the council is unable to borrow that level of money, or indeed wouldn't be able to stand the revenue impact of that. So we're sort of thinking now, hopefully from this meeting there will be some establishment of affordability, and then options can be reviewed and tweaked within that. I think the other thing to remember around the investment in the existing centre is actually over £5 million of that I would describe as legacy investment. So it's the money that perhaps should have been spent over the last decade also to keep the centre in a workable condition. So in a sense, it's quite difficult to kind of expect a return on investment on money that perhaps should have been spent on maintenance during that period. I think that's fine from an introduction from our point of view. Paul, it'd be quite handy if you give us a bit of background on
Yes, happy. Hope everyone can hear me okay. Introduction to myself. Good afternoon. I'm a specialist sport and leisure architect. I've been qualified for 42 years now. And in that time, I've personally designed and delivered over 15 leisure centres in the UK, all of which have swimming pools, which are a high risk design item. They range from about 5 million to 40 million. That was the Life Centre at Plymouth, Tom Daly's hometown. I've also prepared about 30 feasibility and option studies for sport and leisure projects, all in the public sector. Some are refurbishment, some are remodel, and some are new build. Many of these feasibility projects have been undertaken with David Rushton and his team at SLC, and I've worked with them for over 11 years. And as you can see from the reports that are in the appendices, I originally prepared option studies for the Deepings Leisure Centre as far back as 2013. So I know the building pretty well. Also, I understand that councillors have visited 1NK recently. I was the architect for that scheme too. In fact, the building plan is quite similar to Deepings Leisure Centre. I've also prepared most of the new build options in your report and all the refurb remodel options for Deepings Leisure Centre. I was going to make a point about inflation in all the budget cost estimates for the options that we've prepared. They're cautious estimates, and they're based on cost indices that are produced by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. And it's based on an estimated programme, and therefore you need to estimate when constructions start, when it will complete, and what the halfway point is construction. And that's what's used to calculate the inflation. And calculating inflation at the moment, particularly in the building industry, is proving extremely difficult, and it's volatile, as you probably know, both due to increasing labour rates, materials increases, and material scarcities. But so please bear that in mind when we're talking about costs. But I'll be happy to answer any questions as we progress through the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you.
Okay, so as I've already suggested, I propose to take 3 rounds of questions effectively. Part 1 will be the A, B and C on this agenda, consideration of the background information, the presentation that we've just seen and the feasibility work undertaken by a new leisure centre. I'll just remind members that there's a time limit to get through this business of speaking no more than 5 minutes at any one phase of of today's presentation. So please try to group your questions together rather than get into a dialogue. Then we'll move on to item D, consideration of leasing arrangements, and then we need to get on to the final area, which is A, E, F, G, and H. So in order to make a start, are there any questions in the room about the presentation of the report, as well as the background and the feasibility work undertaken? Now, I should say at this stage we have had a number of apologies at late notice, because this meeting was scheduled reasonably as fast as we could. One of those was Councillor Virginia Moran, who has submitted some questions ahead of time. From the chair, I've offered to ask those questions. I should say those questions all relate to the Landis Greer site. So before I pose Virginia's questions, do you want to talk about Landis Greer just to frame that so that the room is aware of where we are with those? Thank you, Councillor Dobson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes. Unfortunately, when I spoke to the owner of the building just last week. He informed me that the building had been sold and at a higher price than we were offering, and so that is no longer available.
Okay, so the Landers Greer site there has been work done on that, but work has stopped because the building is no longer on the market. Okay, I will re-review these questions in light of that information. Are there any other questions in the room? Councillor Dilks.
Thank you. My questions are to Councillor Dobson. I don't think you'll be surprised by any of them. I've got 6 questions for Councillor Dobson. Perhaps if I do 3 together and then the second 3, if that suits you. Councillor Dobson, when was it first suggested to you that if we were to rely on reserves and borrowing, that the brand new build replacement centre you've been promising for years was not actually affordable? Second question is actually related to your leaflet that you did in May. What people in Deep and St James want to know is why in your leaflet that you delivered to local residents as recently as May this year, did you say, and I quote, "We can all look forward to a great new centre in Deep and St James, a new state-of-the-art leisure centre for which funds and land have now been agreed." That wasn't true, was it? I'd be happy to stop there and
I'm keen not to get into a dialogue today, Councillor Dilks. If you can complete your questions today, please. Thank you.
I'd be happy to. Thank you. My next question relates to the full member briefing mentioned on paragraph 1.17 of the report given in October 2020, which was called to update members on the scale of the work involved and the challenges facing the council in terms of affordability on leisure services. My question is, were members actually told at that secret meeting or at any other time before or since that actually in February 2020, 8 months earlier, the second Mace report on which the council spent £284,000 actually made it crystal clear that the election promises of 3 new build centres were unaffordable? And so why did you carry on throwing even more public money at a fantasy smoke and mirrors sham project for almost another year? And my final question to Councillor Dobson, if I may, is you may recall some months after you were appointed by the council leader, Councillor Callum Cook, to be Cabinet Member for Leisure Services, the minutes of a Cabinet meeting show you'd completed visits with locally elected members to all 4 SK leisure centres. At a subsequent public meeting, I asked you to say on what date you'd visited the Deeping Centre. You said that in fact you'd not actually visited it, as stated in the Cabinet minutes, and said that there was no point in visiting it because it was going to be demolished. With the benefit of hindsight, do you think you'd, if you had visited when it was claimed that you had done, you might have been better equipped to highlight the need for urgent action to keep the leisure centre open and build the new one that you to keep it open until the new one that you've been promising was ready? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would just wonder if I could ask on a point of process, can we make sure, because it's such an important decision we're making today and it's a recommendation to the Cabinet with a report, can I ask that all the questions and the answers are fully minuted and made as part of your report? And actually on that point, can I ask that you will present the report to the Cabinet? Thank you.
Well, in terms of the minutes are being kept, and myself and Judy will certainly be looking to ensure that the minutes are accurately presented. Just to go back to your questions, Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the questions. I think I've answered these several times before, but I will continue. As you know, at least the Lynchfield Road playing fields site to enable the development of a new leisure centre was agreed in principle following a report I presented to the council on the 13th of May, 2020. At this meeting, it was agreed that this council should enter into the leasehold agreement, and delegated authority was provided to the chief executive and leader of the council to agree the final terms subject to a site survey. At the time, we were looking to fund a new leisure facility using a mixture of prudential borrowing, local priority reserves, and a capital receipt. Unfortunately, this is now no longer possible, and the council would have to rely solely on prudential borrowing to fund a new leisure centre. This will create a significant ongoing revenue pressure for the council, which, given the financial challenges we are facing, is unaffordable. So that is answer to your first question. The second question was, sorry, Councillor Dilks.
It was your leaflet.
Well, that was on the leaflet I've answered. What was the first one then? Sorry.
Sorry, so you've answered the leaflet, have you?
Yeah, that was the leaflet answer. As far as I was concerned, that was there, but it's now no longer available. So I think I've covered that one.
So I think questions 1 and 2 were about timing. So I think you've covered the timing there. If you can go on to the full member briefing, the question about the full member briefing of the Mace report on October 2020.
Yeah, the Mace report was not commissioned by me. As you know, that was way before. I think
it was presented to you though, a month after you took over the portfolio.
Order, Councillor Dobson. So the question was put that the Mace report was completed and we carried on. I
immediately questioned this report, and that's why we involved our expert on that to look at the centre and see what we could do. I mean, at that time, even we were looking at, we had to phase it in, even if we had the money, and the Deepings was chosen as the prime site to put a new leisure centre on. So it was all linked together, if you like. And that was the one that we were working on first.
Okay, and I think that the final question was about contradictory actions around the period of cabinet meetings and visits. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I have answered this to you before, Councillor Dilks, that yes, I did miss out on the Deepings leisure, but we did catch up on that. I don't think I did on my walk around suggest that the changing rooms were in a dire state of repair and needed upgrading. We knew, well, we didn't know at that stage, well, at that stage it wasn't known that, you know, of how bad the roof was. That only came about, as far as I'm aware, at the beginning or end of last year, when I visited early this year to see them, that they were walking around in the pump room knee deep in water, which we can't have. So that is time when we started asking a survey to be done of the centre, and that survey told us that we should close that centre immediately, and that's the information that I followed.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other questions in the first 3 parts? I'm talking specifically the background to the report and the idea of a new leisure centre. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to Councillor Adam Stokes. You've had the portfolio for finance since 2017, I believe. So the whole time that the new leisure centre has been promised. And during that time, there has been no even proposal, as far as I'm aware, to put a new leisure centre for the Deepings or Stamford or anywhere else into the medium-term financial plan. Can you please explain why there has been no attempt to even put forward a budget or capital requirement for a new leisure centre into the medium-term financial plan, as would be required if we wanted to build a leisure centre like we said we were gonna? My second question is to Councillor Dobson and Councillor Cook, and that is, as late as July this year, you were saying in this chamber that we must find the money for a new leisure centre, that the Deepings Centre, which I think had just closed because of a decrepit state, to use the words of the leader, because the existing building is knackered, that we must find the money to build a new centre. From where are we going to find that money? You've mentioned, Councillor Dobson, that we were going to find it through prudential borrowing, capital receipts, which I guess would be from somewhere in Stamford, and you had another one. I can't remember what the third one was. So why are we no longer able to put the capital receipt and the third item towards the cost of a new leisure centre? My next question is to Mr. Weston. Mr. Weston, when were you first asked to look into refurbishment options rather than new build options? I know that you worked for a long time on the Lynchfield Road site, and I saw various configurations that weren't made public about where on the school playing fields we could put a leisure centre, and we had conversations about whether we could buy a strip of land alongside the Lynchfield Road centre. So we spent a lot of money, I would guess, in geotechnical surveys and topographical surveys and all kinds of different surveys into that site. So we made a lot of progress with that site. So we, meaning the cabinet or the team at SK, must have thought that that was deliverable at some point. So at what point were you told, Mr. Weston, that that was undeliverable? Can I ask you, Mr. Weston, when the Lynchfield Road was off the table, and can you tell me, please, how much interest was there in the Landis-Gear site? Because from my point of view, the Landis-Gear site on the edge of Market Deeping, on the bypass, would be the best option. I'm interested in the numbers also as to why that wasn't taken up either. I'm not sure if it's by you, Mr. Weston, or by the councillors or by the officers, why that wasn't taken further forward. Councillor Dobson has said today that the Landis-Gear site has now been sold. I don't know if that means that the new owner would refuse an approach from the local authority, but certainly it hasn't helped. If we had been more fleet of foot or more swift or more visionary, or if we had an imagination as an authority, we could have looked at that building and looked at the commercial potential of the bits that weren't required, and we could have looked at the income potential with it being on the bypass. Mr. Weston, in your report, you said that the income potential from a building on the bypass would have less income potential than an existing site which is shared with a busy secondary school. And I wonder how that conclusion was come to. Finally, I'd like to reiterate Councillor Dilks's questions to Councillor Dobson, which is that you said that you had visited all the centres and you hadn't. After you were caught out on that, with having, I'm going to say, misled the council, when you were caught out on that and you went back to the site, did you actually go into the boiler house on that occasion? And did you not realise that the boilers are ancient and on their last legs, and they still are? And then going back to the leaflet, you just said that on the 13th of May, on the 13th of May, you reported to, I think, the cabinet. Well, the election and the leaflet were published halfway through April. So Barry Dobson, that was a lie on your leaflet.
I'm going to uphold that. If we can keep the tone of the conversation respectful, but I'll take your point to get additional clarity. But we need to keep this debate respectful. The question is valid. I'll take the valid, but not the personal attack. So I'll strike the personal attack from the record, but I will take the questions. Thank you. I'm grateful for the questions. I think the first one of the five there, I think, was to Councillor Stokes.
Yeah, I'll take that, but I do think that Councillor Baxter should withdraw that comment from the record as well, because I think it's outrageous that he said that.
I've struck that from the record.
I would like an apology from Councillor Baxter. I don't think it's necessary.
I think we'd like to conduct this meeting according to the Nolan principles, one of which is that we should respect one another. And I don't think those kind of attacks are really very helpful. So if we can move on from that and resist that temptation going forward. Thanks very much.
Moving to the questions. So,
I'm happy to answer that. Obviously, at that point, it was still very much at feasibility and the scoping of requirements for the new leisure centre. They would have only gone in there when there was a viable new build scheme and a site agreed. And obviously, COVID did make a massive difference to the financial landscape for the whole council and councils throughout the whole country.
Okay, moving on. Councillor Cook, I believe the next question was for yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for clarity, I know others have declared this. I have trained and used the Deepings Leisure Centre over a number of years, just for clarity. I'm not a current member or anything like that, but just the records. I mean, in terms of affordability, I mean, I think you need to look at how we operate as a council and what it is our priorities are. Now, at the present time, we have 4 leisure centres across our 4 market towns, and we have to balance how we want to provide leisure services across the wider area. I think there is and there has been an ambition to replace the Deepings with a new leisure centre. But quite simply, you know, I mean, if we think about the last 18 months, we have been in COVID response and we are sort of getting back to normal ways of running, albeit COVID's still there. In terms of the financing, though, I mean, the mechanism which would have been used would have been around, you know, the private sector finance, whether they build it and then we lease it back over 25 years. Quite simply, the investment into the leisure market, particularly in local government circles, is diminished, and it has diminished in terms of in the private sector. Yes, you can get finance for private sector gyms because it is a different offer to what that is of that the council would do. The market has changed. I mean, I was with a bunch of leaders last week. You know, some leisure centres across this country have not reopened because the councils cannot afford the revenue costs in terms of running and operating those facilities. You know, our neighbouring Peterborough Council have just shelved their plans for a new leisure centre because it is not financially viable at the present time. So yes, there was an ambition to build a new leisure centre in the Deepings. That isn't there anymore because of finance. And obviously today we're here to discuss a refurbishment option, which basically will give you everything that would be in a brand new leisure centre.
Let's hear some answers first, then I come back. Mr. Weston, I believe the next 2 questions were for yourself.
Okay, yes. I think from memory, I prepared the Landis and Gear option before lockdown started. I remember, so in terms of the sequencing, and I then prepared all the refurb and remodel options for Deepings Leisure Centre over the past 3-4 months. That's the sequence of events. I think that was the question on what did I so that was the sequence. I'd done the new build options for the Lynchfield Road site. I then was asked to look at the Landis and Gear option, and I visited the site in a lot of detail and prepared option studies for that and costs. And then I was asked to look at refurb and remodel options for Deepings Leisure Centre. So that's the sequence I've done the work.
Okay, and the final question was just to further clarity from Councillor Dobson. If you'd like to comment on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Dilks, we have talked about this a lot. I've been caught out. I think that is rather a strange suggestion. I do not tell untruths, and I do what is best for everyone and what I think is right. I made a mistake, and I admitted that to you, that I did not go to the Deepings Leisure Centre with people, with members from the Deepings at that time. I can't remember whether at the time it was actually closed, but we didn't go. I have said that, and I apologise for that. The other centres I went to, and we saw all of those. And the other thing which Councillor Baxter wanted to say to me at full council last week, I do take absolute exception to, and I will not answer that question.
Councillor Robinson, oh sorry, Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Obviously, I'm aware this is a really emotive subject. We all have passion around this topic. We just need to remind members that part of the code of conduct is that we treat each other with respect when we're working as councillors. So if I could ask you just to reflect on our tone when we're asking and answering questions, and ensure that the tone is right for a proper debate. Okay, thank you.
I will allow you to come back after we've heard further questions. Councillor Rice-Oxley.
Hello, I've got a question for Mr. Rushton. Mr. Rushton, delighted to hear, as I'm sure everyone else is, that you factored in the impact of COVID to projections for future income. And the different refurbishment options have slightly different facilities. So you mentioned the recovery is currently at 74%. I wonder if you're able to briefly tell us which leisure aspects are holding up the best. For example, has swimming bounced back, or gym or exercise, or Is there any data around that? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, but basically the swimming is actually recovering very, very well, particularly swimming lessons. And the reason for that is, if you can imagine, there's almost a whole year's worth of swimming pupils who have missed their lessons. So you've got pent up demand. So normally a swimming lesson program, you've got kids coming in and kids going out at the top. Well, the kids aren't going out at the top because they haven't learned to swim during the last year. So actually, many local authorities, and indeed South Stephen included, have got a good level of demand for swimming lessons. Swimming's probably not recovering fully because, and that is potentially due to the age profile. People, it tends to be older people who swim for fitness in swimming pools, and they're still showing a reluctance to go back into any kind of indoor environment. And the problem area is actually health and fitness, which, as you're probably aware, is normally the kind of lucrative element of a leisure service. And effectively, if you've got a facility like the Grantham Meres, it basically, you've got a cross subsidy from health and fitness into the less profitable areas, or areas that require a subsidy. So it's the health and fitness that's not recovering as quickly as other areas, but unfortunately that's the major income stream. So 3 or 4 years ago, if we were building a leisure centre and there was going to be a bigger and better gym, we'd be quite bullish about actually we're going to get sort of 500, 1,000 or whatever extra members. Now we have to be a lot more cautious.
Okay, I'm grateful for that. Moving on, Councillor Mark Whittington, again, just to remind you, we're questioning about for A, B and C areas of the agenda at the moment. Yes, we will move on to other areas.
Yes,
Councillor
fine.
Whittington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because my points, I'm just referring to section 5 of the main report, which is the financial implications. At the present moment of time, I'm just going to discuss the financial implications of the potential new build options. So on table 5.5, it's those sort of first 5 columns which look at the new build. And I guess my question really needs to be addressed to, I guess, a mixture of Councillor Adam Stokes and also to Richard Wiles, our section 151 officer. And it's around the financial affordability of a new build. Because 5.6 clearly says that Council's medium-term financial plans cannot demonstrate affordability for any of the new build or refurb options. But a bit further on 5.3, it talks about the borrowing costs that potentially a new build, just for new build, would indicate, and there's various amounts there from 850,000 up to, I think the highest is about just under 1.4 million. I just really want to know potentially what does this mean, and also it may be useful that if Richard could explain how the minimum revenue provision works, the impact that would have upon the council's revenue budget going forward, because obviously it will be a charge on the revenue budget in effect, which then means there's less money available for other services. And what could that mean? You know, if we add a £1.4 million charge, say, or whatever a figure is, to our I&E, what does that mean? Does that mean we can't collect the bins every 2 weeks? Do we have to do the bins every 3 or 4 weeks? Do we have to close other services down? What does this actually mean for the ratepayers, the council taxpayers of the rest of the district? If we wanted to fund it out of council tax, for instance, what sort of rates would we be looking at? Would we have to increase the council tax by? Because I really think we need to look at the financial affordability of the new build in terms of the impact they will have upon the rest of the district. So those might be sort of questions, but I'm guessing that it's either Councillor Stokes as portfolio holder or Richard Wiles as a 151 officer who are probably the best people to answer those. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Richard Wiles.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the question. Yeah, clearly Section 5 attempts to set out the financial implications of the decisions. Clearly those decisions are significant in terms of those new build options. And as I said in the report, there's a range of 5 which go from a figure of around 800,000 per annum. These are for 25 years, per annum for 25 years. So the smaller 6-lane pool, which is the less lower on the scale, that's 807,000 a year, going up to the 8-lane 50-metre Olympic size one, that's over 1.3 million per annum. That's a mixture of borrowing costs, which will be at Public Works loan board type rates, roughly about 2%, and something called a minimum revenue provision, which is effectively revenue budget the council would need to set aside in order to, which is the revenue budget that would need to be set aside to repay the debt. So those two elements combined make up that figure that's quoted in that. Just by way of contextualising that, if the council takes the £5 increase, which is the amount that, can anyone hear me on that? Which is the amount that the council can raise its council tax by, that raises roughly about £250,000 a year if the council took the £5 maximum. So those sort of figures, this would be pushing the council into referendum type territory. But the smaller 6-lane pool would be a £16.57 increase on that council tax to fully pay that debt. And that would range up to £28.58 if you went to the extreme of the 50-metre 8-lane pool option. So that increase would be on each taxpayer of the district for that 25-year period. Clearly, anything over above the £5 rate gets us into referendum territory, which is where the council would need to then seek endorsement from residents that increase would be acceptable. That's about a £60,000 cost in order to run that process through. If you talk that to a more local level, so if you invited both the deep-ins, if you go back to the expense area type scenario where you could take the location of that new build option and you invited the Market Deeping Council and the Deepings Parish Council to contribute, similarly, that would be £167 per resident of that area to contribute, going up to £288 per resident to contribute if you ring fence that cost to that local population. In terms of the overall budgets available, what my comments are saying in 5.7 is there's an imperative on the council to restructure, because those two scenarios I just described are not particularly palatable or get the council into some difficult positioning in terms of its residents. But if you took it in the context of the structural review of all the budgets, clearly most of the council services fall into the 2 lanes of statutory services and discretionary services. So the things the council has to do and the things the council chooses to do. So if you go down the discretionary route, things like CCTV, if you decided not to have that as a service, that would save £275,000 a year. If you decided to go, I think you mentioned rounds, if you decided to go from the current weekly rounds, 16 rounds, and halve that, that would save £940,000 a year. If you decided to close the art centres, that would save £500,000 a year, although you still have premise costs. So those together as an example would get you to the equivalent position of that. You could stop your festival programme, that would save £100,000 a year. And so it goes on. There are layers of which the council could decide to face the consequence of this decision in the context of the budgets it's got available to it and reposition the priorities, which all goes back to the corporate plan and what's the council set out as important to it. So hopefully, given the size of these figures, it helps members kind of get that figure in their mind and understand the implications of each of the decisions they've got.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stokes, do you want to add some comments to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, Richard Wiles actually covered the discretionary and the statutory areas very well, actually. If we decided to go down the new build route, it would have been quite expensive. We'd have had to make very tough decisions with the discretionary services, and we would have had to look at big savings within the budget. So, yeah, I mean, Richard has summed it up perfectly.
Fine. Are there any other comments in the room? At the end, please. I'll circle back at the end. Councillor Fellows, I would like to make some progress, but Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, it's a question for Mr. Westwood, really, and very simplistically, and please stay with me on this one. Is a major refurbishment of the Deeping Leisure Centre the only possible way forwards for it? Have you considered, or is there a possibility, thinking about an earlier question from a member of the public, of a patch up and mend? In other words, refurbishment work that could keep it going for another 5 or 10 years? Or professionally, do you think the only safe and sensible thing to do is either knock it down or refurbish it?
Right.
Mr. Weston.
Yes, I'll come back to that. I think the nearest we've got to your patch up and mend option is option A, but we were looking at to give the building a 25-year life in terms of a worthwhile investment. Option A deals with all those things that are failing with the building at the moment. It doesn't provide any different facilities, but it would last you for 25 years. I say sadly, the roof is a bigger problem perhaps people realise, because the water has got into the structure below the roof material. So to last for 25 years, you need to replace the deck. So that's a significant item of cost. I believe that they're coming back to, do you knock it down and is a new build the only other option? No, I think I prefer to call it a remodel, because that building there's lots of good things about that building. The structure itself, the carcass of the building is quite sturdy. The pool tanks themselves are in good condition. By remodeling it, we can provide all the facilities that a new build would provide, and at significant lesser cost. And we have in the option C, basically that building would be quite transformed. And if you've been to one NK, you'll know how that changed quite radically. And that was in fact a refurb and remodel option. So simple answer to your question, I believe that a refurb and remodel option is quite viable.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other questions in the room? Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. It just seems to me that finance is what you want to make of it. If you go back 2.5 years when I was elected to this council, there was going to be a minimum of 3 refurbishments at the leisure centres, plus 1 new and possibly 2 new refurbishments. And when I asked questions about how they would manage, well, yes, we had plenty of options for how we could manage the financing of that, including borrowing and including development of sites, including sale of lands and so on and so forth. So we went from 3 refurbishments and 1 new site to we can't even afford to keep the current sites in decent working order in the space of 2.5 years. And it just seems that now, and the idea that COVID has been such a major issue, of course, the finances are under pressure. I understand that. I'm not daft enough not to. I understand that there will be pressures on all the budgets of what we want to do as a council. But the COVID deficit, I believe, is $1 million over the year. And here we've been talking about huge numbers of possibilities, and all of a sudden all of them have disappeared, or nearly all of them disappeared. And it seems to me that money can do what you want money to do. And I've heard Richard speak in the past about various options for financing things, not necessarily leisure centres, but financing capital costs. And it doesn't seem to me that we've considered all those options to look at the capital cost or how we manage the capital cost, whether it be 5 million, 6 million or 20 million going forward. It seems that we've decided that this is the option, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a cheaper option, and therefore we will finance it as best we can. Thank you.
Okay, your comments are noted, Councillor Knowles. Are there any other comments and questions from the committee? Okay, I would like to make some progress, but I will take a couple of closing statements before we move on to the next section. Both Councillor Whittington and Councillor Baxter have asked to make a closing statement just before we move on. If you can make your comments brief, please, so that we can make some progress. Councillor Baxter.
Well, Chair, it's more asking for an answer to the questions that I asked earlier on. Councillor Stokes said that he would only put the money into the medium-term financial plan when there was a viable plan. So what that's basically saying is it was never viable. At no point has any officer ever or anyone ever told us that it is really a viable project, despite the election leaflets. He also said that building a new centre now would be, quote, quite expensive. Well, what was it before COVID? Are you telling me that suddenly it's now quite expensive, whereas before we could have done it? Because I don't believe that. I'm beginning to wonder if there was ever a political will to build even one, let alone 3 leisure centres, and really that's disgraceful. I'd like to ask Councillor Cook again. At what date in July did he realise that the leisure centre, the leisure industry was on its knees? Because in July, at a meeting, he said we need to find the money for a new centre, and now we will. And now he's saying that since July he's realised that we've had COVID, and lo and behold, the leisure industry's in turmoil. Councillor Dobson did not answer my question about whether, when he finally did go to the leisure centre, whether or not he went into the boiler house and saw the ancient decrepit boilers. I'd like to ask Mr. Wiles about the capital receipts that Councillor Dobson mentioned. We are getting a capital receipt from a site in Samford. What's happening to that? Because that was part of Councillor Dobson's original plan. Just on a technical note, Mr. Wiles, you mentioned £288 per year on the council tax for the Deepings area, if we went that way. Is that per year, or I assume that's per year rather than forever? Oh, it's per year, okay. And finally, we were told before this meeting that the consultants would be available to answer all our awkward questions. So forgive me for asking you an awkward question, Mr. Weston, but when we were paying you to do the investigation into Landis Gear as a site and to Lynchfield Road as a site and anything else, knowing that you had just refurbished North Hykeham, a very similar leisure centre, did you not suggest to South Gesteven that at that time, that instead of spending £20 million on a new build, we could have a as good as new centre in our existing centre for less than half the cost? Thank you.
Okay, I'm grateful for those comments there noted. That last question, I think, will take as part of the refurbishment discussion, which we're coming up. Councillor Whittington, do you want to
thank
make your
you,
closing
Speaker.
comments, please?
It's really just to follow up on the answers that Richard Wiles and Councillor Stokes gave me, and I think it's starting at figures, I think, that Richard gave us about the impact upon our revenue budgets of trying to finance a new build at a time when we know going forward though we've got nearly £1 million gap in our revenue budget as it is, without adding this on top. I mean, I think the implications for essential services across the district would be, I'm afraid, quite dramatically affected. And on that basis alone, there's absolutely no way, I believe, that a new build is affordable. And I think they should just discount it as an option. I just don't think it financially there's any viability in it at all. So I think that really just concludes. I would just ask the committee to ask themselves, if we do go ahead with a new build leisure centre and we have to find £2.5 million worth of cuts to essential services, what services would you be able to defend to your residents that you've cut to support a new build leisure centre in the Deepings? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Those comments are noted. Thank you for those closing comments. I would like to make some progress, please.
Chair, my comments were not comments, they were questions. This is a scrutiny committee, so I would like my questions answered.
One of those questions we'll certainly take in discussion of the refurbishment. I heard a repetition of the questions that have already been addressed there. I heard answers to those. Councillor Dobson, if you'd like to comment briefly, please, because I do want to make some progress. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Chairman, because it's been asked so many times. Probably not, if I haven't answered you, Councillor Baxter, yes, I was in the boiler room, but one of those boilers is already defunct. And they're both of the same age, and what we were worried about is the second one would go as well. And if that went, the leisure centre would not exist anymore, because it couldn't be open to the public because there were no pump, no boiler in there. But there we go.
Okay, thank you for those. So moving on to section D, consideration of the leasing arrangements. Did you want to comment to introduce this, Councillor Dobson, or should we just go straight to questions?
Straight
to questions. So on item D, consideration of the leasing arrangements, are there any questions in the room? Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, really, it's taking up one of the questions from a member of the public, because I do not believe we can move on at all this afternoon until we know what the leasing arrangements are. I was incredulous to find that the school had contributed nothing to the maintenance of the leisure centre since 2014. I can't believe we're even considering engaging in any work there until we've engaged the trust, which I believe is called the Anthem Trust, until we have spoken to them and sat down with them. Because I think, again, we've been put in almost an invidious position whereby government changes have protected the school, which is in fact a trust in its own right, money making if you like, but certainly paid for out of the public purse. The school is one of the major users of the leisure centre. Should we not be really discussing, and having been discussed with the trust, how we move forward? We have to have a lease that's workable. We can't spend any money on it if we don't. How far have we got with that? Are we in fact discussing with Anthem Trust? And if not, why not?
Councillor Dobson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, we are in discussion with LCC, who still owns the complete building, and the lease agreement now must be between us and the Anthem Trust, and that is ongoing.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yes, thanks very much indeed. I think Councillor Fellows makes a very, very valid point around the lease and where we are, because obviously, you know, whatever, if later on today, whatever option we go for is going to involve borrowing money from somewhere. And obviously any money we borrow is going to have to be secured on something. Obviously, if we've got a sublease of the leisure centre, that gives us an asset in effect, or something to borrow against. So I do think it is important that we understand the leasing arrangements. But my understanding is that it's a bit of a sort of a catch-22 situation at the moment, is that the Anthem Trust are reluctant to enter into a lease until they know that the council have made a commitment to spend money. And from our perspective is we've got an issue about committing to spend money without there being a lease in place. So it is catch-22. Stop hitting the microphone with a pen, Mark. So it is a little bit of a catch-22 situation. So I'm just wondering, because I did see something in here about that we may be able to agree in advance a draft heads of term that so an agreement in principle that if we were to invest money into the leisure centre, the Anthem Trust would move on the lease. And I heard that they may be willing to sign a piece of paper to that effect, or to give a legal commitment that they would be willing to do that. I'm just wondering if it's possible to have an update on that, because that would clarify in my own mind, you know, the fact that there would be a legal arrangement of some sort in place between ourselves and the Anthem Trust. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Woodson. I'd just like to echo those comments and add that, can you give me some assurances that we're actually doing this in the right order? That surely if this is in the private sector, you'd be securing the lease first and keeping very quiet about what you're doing with the building until you've secured the lease. I'm struggling myself personally to understand why we're doing that in parallel. Karen Whitfield, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really complex legal arrangement and discussions that are ongoing, so I'll try and be as clear as I can. I think as a council, we've had good progress and good sensible discussions with the Anthem Trust, and we do now have an agreed heads of terms, set of heads of terms, which will go to the trustees the 2nd of December for their approval, hopefully. I think I can understand members' concerns. I think it's a given, and I think the report is really clear when we say we cannot move forward on anything without any legal basis with the Anthem Trust. I think the legal advice has been, and I think this is really predicated on, you know, the school do not want to take on the lease of the existing building in the state and condition that it's in. However, we can agree an agreement for lease, which is still a formally legally binding document. Attached to that agreement for lease would be the terms of the formal lease, which will come into play upon practical completion of the works, and also a specification of the works that the council intends to do. So for some extent, that protects the council in the fact that we would have a legally binding agreement in place. If the school backed out of that, they would be in breach of contract, and obviously we would have legal remedy. But it also protects the school in the fact that they won't take on a building in the current state and condition. So I do understand members' concerns. You'll appreciate that this matter has been ongoing for a significant amount of time. However, we do seem to have got ourselves to the best position that we've ever been in, and I hope that those conversations will carry on a positive trajectory.
Can I just ask on that as a follow-up? How secure are our rights on legal remedy there? I'm just thinking of the optics of us suing a school to secure our legal rights. Where's the legal advice? Can you share the legal advice with this committee on that?
Yes, certainly. So that's based on the legal advice that we've taken. And we have to remember that the Anthem Trust are not a school, they're an academy, they're a significant private organisation with significant reserves and assets.
So you can share the legal advice on that. Okay, thank you. Moving on, Councillor Dilks, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm pleased to hear there's been some progress after 8 years, or is it after 47 years on the lease? But really, clearly the school don't want to take it on. That's quite obvious. And we're in the precarious, insecure position right now of being a tenant at will with no legal obligation to that building. And even with a lease, what we're being asked to do is pour millions of public money into a building that we're never going to own, that is always going to be a liability and never an asset. My questions on the lease, however, are, and I would appreciate separate answers if possible, can this council be absolutely confident that after 8 years of okay, we've got to where we've got to, and yes, we've got some, and we're in the best position now, that can we be confident that a lease will be agreed in a timely fashion, to actually make anything viable? And if no lease can be agreed, if the present position continues, does that mean the original recommendation to Cabinet in August to lock the doors and walk away actually becomes reality? I mean, I think we all suggest it does. It has to. We don't want to be invested in that. I think there is a consensus. We don't want to be putting that money in without that firm lease. But what is Plan B? That's really the question. What happens if we? It's really your question as to, is it in the right order? All the bits are there, but are they in the right order? So that's really the concern, isn't it, of all of us? Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Whitfield.
Yes, thank you for that question. Yeah, I take on board that in the private sector we wouldn't do it this way, but we are in a bit of a catch-22 because until we agree the heads of terms of a lease and a option going forward for refurbishment, I cannot progress those conversations with the Anthem Trust. It's as simple as that, because obviously the agreement for lease will need to have those details. In terms of confidence, I think it says quite clearly in the report that that's still one of the major risks around this, the inability to secure a lease. And as officers, we're committed. We've seen commitment from LCC and also the Anthem Trust about wanting to resolve this long-standing issue. Some of it will be out of our hands, because even if we agree terms, the Department for Education will need to sign this off. And they've indicated to LCC informally that they've been pressurising them to resolve this issue for a number of years. So the indications are from them that they will deal with it as quickly as they possibly can. But again, I can give no assurances on that other than that we'll continue to work.
Can I say thank you? And can I say thank you to Karen Whitfield for the questions that I put some questions in yesterday, and you very kindly came back with most of the answers, and I don't have to ask those questions. So that saves a bit of time. Thank you. I'm really pleased you mentioned the DFE. That was the other part of the question I forgot to ask. Is, what sort of time scale is the DFE likely to come back in and hopefully, yes, say yes. We know that, you know, things in the DFE or any other big department, they don't happen in a day or two.
I will allow that question.
Sorry.
Carry on. That's fine. Thank you. Phil. Phil. Karen Whitfield.
I can only comment on what I've said earlier, that there's been significant pressure from the Department for Education to resolve this issue. Obviously, they've been involved since 2014 and been putting pressure on the County Council and the Anthem Trust to resolve matters. Once the heads of terms are approved by the trustees, all the forms and paperwork are ready to go to the DFE, but that is out of this council's control. But we have assurance from LCC that they will try and expedite it and put pressure on.
Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was under the impression that if the Anthem Trust were the main users, even without a lease, they would be responsible, would be classed in law as the head leasee. If we used it less, we would go down the scale. And I have asked somebody who is allegedly an expert on this, and they were under the impression that if the school has had the maximum use by far, then the school, however it's worked, if it's under the Anthem Trust, should be the head leasee, even without a lease. So they should bear the main cost of dilapidation.
Yes, thank you for the comments. Actually, the council has been responsible for the management of this building for 47 years, and that's been both as a council but also under a contractual arrangement. So we've actually let a contract to a private contractor to manage the building, and then in return we've taken a payment from the school for the activities that they've undertaken. So they have been significant in terms of use of the sports hall, swimming pool during the daytime, but the remainder of the time that's been a community facility. So evenings, weekends, school holidays, that's been a school facility. So as the district council, we've been responsible for the upkeep, the maintenance. Up until 2014, we received a contribution from LCC in that regard as well. So I think the legal advice we've received is that actually the council has been the head tenant in as such.
Councillor Philip Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. Just clarify, please, something for me. What assumptions have we made, given that walking away from it is one of our negotiating ploys or one of our negotiating arms? What assumptions were made about us just saying, right, we walk away from it, we're having nothing more to do it? What are the assumptions behind that, please?
Karen?
And I think in the report that we took to council in the 2nd of September, we alluded to some options that would be on the table, and part of that would be we'd have to have correspondence and agreement between ourselves and LCC as to who would be responsible for the building once the district council had vacated it. But I've no other information to give in that regard because the conversations haven't happened.
Councillor Mansfield.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, really. I went on the tour of Northcay, which is a similar kind of refurbish of one of the options, which I know we're going to discuss shortly. Now, they used to kind of have a lease with the school, and the school didn't renew their lease. So are we saying that if the school doesn't renew their lease, which I know is not what we want, we do want the school to be involved, please don't quote me wrong, would we not then look at the option of the refurb and the kind of, because it's kind of been shown to us that we're there, that it does work without the school. I'm trying to keep up with this. Money's always a little slower for myself. So please just kind of correct me if I'm wrong.
Karen Whitfield.
I think what you're saying, Councillor Mansfield, is just for us to give you some reassurance that we wouldn't invest in the centre without a lease, because we wouldn't be able to do that and secure the money or the borrowing over a significant period of time.
Thank you.
So to confirm, the lease is contingent upon any investment. Councillor Westrop.
Could Karen just say how long this lease is continuing for, or how long a negotiation time frame? Or the length of the lease that you're
Perhaps
actually
if I
going to
could
negotiate?
clarify, how long have we been negotiating on this lease?
Yeah, and also how long a new lease are you expecting to get?
Karen Whitfield.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer the second question. It would be a 125-year lease because the advice has been it has to be on standard academy terms. So the lease to the school would be, LCC to the school would be 125 years, and then the subsequent lease to the district council would need to be the same term. However, there would be option for a break clause within that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Chair. I was in the Deeping St James Parish Council meeting in 2011 when the school head and chair of governors came in and said, you must give us a 125-year lease on your land. So it's been going on for more than 10 years, these negotiations. And during that time, I mean, I'd like to ask Councillor Dobson. Councillor Dobson, you were the county councillor for 4 of those years, from 2015 to 2017 to 2021. You were the county councillor, as well as for part of that time holding the portfolio at SK Full Leisure. So I wonder what steps you took at Lincolnshire to try and resolve the lease situation. And I might add into that councillors, the other cabinet members, councillors Trollope, Bellew, Stokes, Reid, were also on the county, and Councillor Whittington, I don't hold you for it, you were a long way away, but you also happened to be on the county council at the time. So what actually took place in terms of the negotiations between SKDC and LCC during those 4 years? It's more complicated than we're making out. And I think I remember what happens at the end of Catch 22, and it's not a pretty story. This is not just a matter of the Anthem Trust subleasing to SKDC. As I understand it, before SKDC can take a lease from from the Anthem Trust, first, the Anthem Trust has to sort out its lease with the county council. But as part of that, we also have to sort out the whole lease on the whole site, including the playing fields, which means that we also have to involve the parish council. I don't know whether the parish council have signed their part of the lease. We have 4 parish councillors from Deeping St James here in the room, I think, so maybe one of them can tell me where they are with the lease. But on top of that, part of the parish council's lease is let to the rugby club. So I don't know where we stand with the rugby club. So it seems it's a little bit like 1914 in that if the rugby club don't move, then neither will the parish council, and the parish council don't move, then neither will the county. And then if they can't agree that with the school, then there's no chance for SKDC to sort itself out. It's a hornet's nest, which is why I understand that in 2017, when the ink was nearly ready, when the paper was nearly ready to sign, the leader, the then new leader at the time, Matthew Lee, took a look at the hornet's nest and thought, hang on, maybe we could do better by building a new centre. What happened to that? So it's been going on since 2011. There was a hiatus at 2017. Can I ask, when will we be able to employ the first contractor? When will the first man in a hard hat or woman in a hard hat arrive on site? Will it be on the 2nd of December when we have? Will it be on the 2nd of December when we have agreed with, hopefully, with the chair of governors at the school for an agreement to a proposal for a heads of terms, maybe? Or will it be when we get the final DFE approval, which I would guess would be, with a fair wind, would be 6 months hence, would it not? The other point I want to make is that the school have currently put in an application for a temporary sports hall. I think that is reflective of how confident the school is that we're going to resolve this situation anytime soon, that they're going to have a temporary sports hall because they know that the building work, even the leasing work, is going to go on for ages. And if they do that, if they have their temporary sports hall and exam hall, what motivation will the school have to get this sorted? Because I know the school is there to educate children and they've got the best interests of the people of the Deepings at heart, but if they solve their exam problem, why would they want to move another inch?
Grateful for your observations. Karen Whitfield, can you comment on specifically the complexity of the negotiations and the timetable around that, which I think is the gist of the questioning there? Obviously, we can't take questions to the county council. We are the district council here, but the questions around the complexity of the negotiations, I think, were certainly valid. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'll try and cover that off. So obviously the lease between LCC and the Anthem Trust will have to take place in parallel. So those negotiations are well advanced as well. So they're suitably looking at an agreement for lease, as will the Anthem Trust and the District Council, and those two agreements will be entered in concurrently. The comments around Deeping St James Parish Council, they do have an interest or own a piece of the Lynchfield Road playing field that's currently leased to the county council, and there's provision within that lease for them to sublease that to us, which would then allow the development of the 3G pitch.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions in the room? We've heard about the complexity.
Sorry, Graham, I did ask.
Councillor Baxter.
What progress was made during the years 2017 to 2021, when several members, but particularly Barry Dobson, was sitting on both councils? What practical steps were taken forward to resolve this lease situation?
I'd like to.
Councillor Dobson, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, of course I can.
In your capacity as a district councillor.
So Councillor Ashley Baxter does know, and Councillor Phil Dilks will know, that I attended just about every parish council meeting at the Deeping St James Parish Council. And we discussed this in great lengths. We got to file heads of terms with LCC. I worked with that on them, and also with the council itself, who own, as Karen Whitfield has just told us. You know, we did as much as we could to get this through. And it's not an easy process. And to sit there smugly and saying, oh, you know, what did you do? I mean, we did an awful lot, and we don't have to report to you at every stage. We've reported to people, it's been done. I would have liked to see, and I think many other people will, that we're going to have a new leisure centre on that Lynchfield Road site. It was there. Paul Weston has been in. I went over with him and looked at, you know, the surveys he was doing. We set our hearts on it. That's what I wanted for the Deepings. But financially, it's off the table. As you heard now in July, we even thought up to July this year, we'd still be able to make it, but we can't.
Okay, I'm grateful for those comments. What we've heard today is obviously that this is a complex negotiation with multiple parts, multiple moving parts. I have a recommendation that this joint scrutiny committee calls upon the Anthem Trust and the Department of Education to resolve with other partners the lease of the Deepings Leisure Centre to allow Leisure SK and South Steeping District Council to reopen this leisure centre as soon as possible. Do I have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Whittington.
Mr. Chairman, if I might say, on a point of order, that seems to be premature. We haven't actually gone through all the options, and we haven't, in my view, yet concluded that you know, one of these options is the way forward. We have got to still talk about the Landis and Gear site. I appreciate the difficulties in doing that, but you know, that may well be considered as an option.
It may well, but the absolute contingent on going forward for any renovation is a lease in place. And I think we've heard that repeatedly today, and it's a complex negotiation, as has been outlined. And therefore, I think the will of this scrutiny committee is to call upon all the parties present to work towards a solution where, at least if we did come up with a renovation, that it could be implemented. Councillor Dilts, you want to question?
I'd be happy to support that at the end of the meeting, Mr. Chairman. If we could, would it be possible to deal with that motion at the end of the meeting?
Is there anybody that wants to second that motion now? Councillor Whittington.
I'd be happy to second that now, because whether we do it now or at the end of the meeting, I think we still send the same messages going over to both the Anthem Trust and the DFE, really, you know, who do seem to be the parties who are causing the logjam here, to actually work with the district council and the county council. So I think it should, whichever way we do it, it will form part of the recommendation of this meeting anyway to council. Thank you.
I would second that. I think without a strong recommendation that the lease has to be in place, we're almost wasting our time discussing a refurbishment. So it has been duly proposed and seconded. I can repeat it again. This joint scrutiny committee calls upon the Anthem Trust of the Department for Education to resolve the lease of the Deepings Leisure Centre to allow Leisure SK and South Kesteven District Council representatives to reopen as soon as possible, subject to other options.
If I might comment on that, point one, as a scrutiny committee, I don't think we call on anyone to do anything except for the cabinet. Isn't that how the constitution works?
Alan Robertson.
Yes, I think where we're at in this is that we can make recommendations to do that to the cabinet or to the cabinet member. But it doesn't mean that we can't call on someone to do something to make a request, as this is suggesting here. It's not suggesting we make a decision, it's making a request.
So I guess the resolution would be altered to stay within our power. So that's to recommend to the relevant cabinet member, which I guess would be Councillor Dobson, to call upon the Anthem Trust and the DFE to sort this logjam out. I think it's interesting that we're pointing the finger at the County Council or the Anthem Trust or the DFE for the logjam. And I would really be astonished if we haven't already, if that cabinet member or the cabinet as a whole haven't already called upon the DFE and the Anthem Trust to resolve the lease situation. And I know they're not here, but I would like to hear what the Anthem Trust say to that accusation that they haven't moved. If it is the Anthem Trust that haven't moved in 10 years, then I don't really understand why they would move now.
Okay, that is not the insinuation in the recommendation. I'm happy for this to be a recommendation for the cabinet member or the leader of the council to make that recommendation, but it is to get everyone to work as fast as possible to reopen this leisure centre should we choose to go down the refurbishment route. Is there anybody else that wants to speak on this recommendation? Okay, all those in favour? Any against? And any abstentions? Okay, that was agreed unanimously. I've had before we move on to the final point, which is item 3, items E, F, G and H, I've had a request from the floor for a comfort break. Therefore, I'm going to call a comfort break for 8 minutes, which will take us to 4 o'clock exactly. The meeting is adjourned for 8 minutes. Thank you all. If I can call the room to order, please. Order. Order. Are we recording again?
Yeah, we did stop recording.
Order. Order. Thank you. If I can move on to the third area of questioning, which is questions for the refurbishments. That's E, F, G and H on your agenda. Councillor Dobson, did you want to introduce this or should we go straight to questions?
Go straight to questions, Chairman.
Straight to questions. Are there any questions from the committee in the room? Councillor Crawford.
Thank you. On all the options, I noticed additional works requested by the school. And what works have the school requested? Thank you.
Karen Whitfield.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Crawford. So as the negotiations have been ongoing with the Anthem Trust and Deeping School, there are 3 lots of works that they've asked the council to look at, one of which we would have brought into the scheme anyway, which is the resurfacing of the car park, because when you went on the visit, you'll have seen that's in a really poor condition. The bulk of the money is actually relating to the provision of a new incoming water main. So at the moment, the water main runs across the school building and periodically that floods. So there's some breakages in the water main. So that's bringing in a new water source. And the third one is just some bollards put at either side of the entrance gates, which will just restrict access to the car park when the facility is closed.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from the committee about refurbishment options? Councillor Dilks.
Mr. Chairman, I just seek your advice. Is this the right place to talk about Landis & Gear?
We shall come on to any. Well, if you're talking about a refurbishment of potential sites, is that what you're talking about? Alternative refurbishment? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the report. There's quite a lot in the report about it, about the possibilities. I appreciate what Councillor Dobson has told us.
So you've requested the idea of talking about a refurbishment in an abstract sense with the potential for Landis & Greer and other potential sites in the abstract. So in that context, we will take questions.
Okay, I'll press on then. I've got to say I'm hugely disappointed to hear that Landis & Gear has been sold. It's not a surprise. I mean, it's been on the market over a year, as I understand it. So somebody's snapped it up and good luck to them. But I almost feel like it's that show on television where they bring out the yacht at the end and they say, here's what you could have had. Because here's what you could have won. Because the report that we've got, and there's pages of it, and compares Landis & Gear refurbishment with, purchasing Landis & Gear or becoming a tenant at Landis & Gear and refurbishing that or turning that into a leisure centre. And there's a comparison, 3 or 4 pages of a comparison, which is really welcome. But what it compares it against a new build. It doesn't compare it against renovating the existing Deepings Leisure Centre. And I just think that's a bit sort of unfortunate that we had, I appreciate it was done a year ago, but had we been, I think to use Councillor Baxter's phrase, a bit more fleet-footed, I did hear Councillor Dobson say that somebody's purchased it for more than we offered. Did we actually make an offer on it then? Is a question to consider. I'm sure Councillor Dobson will come back on that. But if you'd like, I'll just sort of carry on and finish my statement or questions on the Landis & Gear site. It does have, I've got to say, it is a big building. It's a fantastic big building. It's 15 years old. And we were told, it's no good. We can't get the funding on the 15-year-old building, but we can get it on the 47-year-old building. That didn't seem to sort of add up to me much, although I hear the reasons that's being promoted. But on the Landis & Gear, I've got to say I was really disappointed with the report that came in on Landis & Gear, because
We have spoken about Landison Gear. Are you talking about the refurbishment concept and taking refurbishment to other third-party sites, such as a potential Landison Gear? Is that where your questions are driving here?
Pretty much, Mr. Chairman, but we haven't spoken about it with respect. In this meeting, you're saying?
Councillor Whittington.
I did refer to Landison Gill as part of my question when I was talking about the cost of refurbishment, and I mentioned the 5 options in the table on page in 5 of the table on page 27, and one of those options there is Landison Gill. So I think we discussed Landison Gill as part of the new bill discussion we had earlier. I'm a bit confused now as to why we're moving back to it.
Oh, so it's closed now, is it?
I think we'll take statements at the end, but you wanted to raise it in the context of a refurbishment. Do you have any questions about how a refurbishment could be placed in another context? If
Mr. Chairman, what I wanted to say was that I was disappointed in what was given to us that was a year old. I'm sorry we didn't act a bit more fleet-footedly a year ago, but that building had huge potential as a leisure centre. I don't know if it still has. There is, although it's sold, it may be that the new owners will be looking for a long-term tenant and that something could be done there. But the actual words in the report, the reasons why it's not the way forward as recommended or suggested to us, is based on things like, oh, it's too big for a leisure centre. But there doesn't seem to have been a lot of work, if any, done on what else could we do with the space, with the extra space, such as across the road, there's the Eventus Centre, which is bursting at the seams. And, you know, on financial grounds, we're not having the second Eventus Centre. The old one is just going to be refurbished.
Okay, those points are noted. Thanks. Moving you back to the refurbishment. Do you have questions about the refurbishment?
You mean on the refurbishment of the existing site?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why it keeps coming back to that, because that's where it's we're all sort of being pointed. No, at the moment I don't, but I may have some before we close it down. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor. Councillor Stevens.
Yeah, can I just interject here, just as a matter of housekeeping? Can I just explain that we all should be wearing our masks when we're moving around the building, obviously not when we're sitting down. I'm just saying that as a point of clarification because we've had a question from somebody watching online. So I just want to reassure them that we are wearing masks when we're moving around, but we're taking them off so that we can speak in the chamber. So just to remind everyone as well to put your masks on when we stand up. Okay, thanks very much.
Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start sort of carrying on where it was with the new builds and start looking at some of the financial implications. But I'm very much potentially aware that I want to try and stay out of the pink papers, but there's an awful lot of key detailed information in here around the refurb options and for the finances. And I'm just wondering if, obviously, depends on the
you'll have to talk in the abstract at this moment. If you need to go into the pink papers, that's absolutely fine. I can circle back to you, but we'll have to exclude press and public. So sticking on the public papers at the moment.
So talking in terms of, I'll talk around the public papers and hopefully won't need to go into them. I think what might be useful for me is maybe to kind of understand a little bit from Paul Weston and SLC, some of the thinking behind when they sort of were costing out some of the options, because obviously option A is a refurb of what's there at the moment. So there's no extra increase in anything, it's just making good. Option B, I think we move up from 31 fitness stations to 18. That's the only real change. Moving up to B plus, I think we increase the studio floor space. Again, it goes up by about 115 square meters. But then option C and options A, B plus, options A, B, and B plus in effect use pretty much the existing way in which the current centre is laid out, and there's not a great deal of sort of walls being moved and that kind of stuff. So it's a kind of working within what's there at the moment, as it were. So just a little bit of explanation from them about how they've built the costs up and how they've built the income up. But then, of course, when we move on to option C is a completely different kettle of fish, because in effect, it adds on more studio space to 200 metre square studios, which obviously involves quite a lot of internal moving in terms of moving stuff and reprovisioning, and the entire cost base is different. So, but of course, what option C does is it fulfills all the needs, all the requirements of the needs assessment. Because as you go up and you compare the needs assessment that was done, as you move from A doesn't address any of the needs assessments requirements. B does a few, B plus does a few more, but it's only C that addresses all of those needs assessments. So just a little bit of, and maybe Karen Whitfield can help this. I'd be interested to know the thought processes behind all of this, how it was all kind of drawn up, and some of the assumptions around cost and income. And then I'd like to just come back to Richard, going back to following up my question on overall financial affordability. And this is the sort of the second 4 columns on page 27. Just a little bit, obviously, the annual borrowing costs are less, but just some flavour potentially of ways potentially around how some of this could be financed. Because I'll tell you where I'm coming from. My own personal view is I think that for a variety of reasons, and I won't go into them, I think they're in the public record, the people of the Deepings have been let down really by SK and probably LCC and probably by people over a number of years. And I actually do think that we do need to try to be as reasonably ambitious as we can. I don't think we can afford a new build, but I actually think that maybe with a bit of flexing, we can probably go towards a really good option for them. B plus C, I tend to think C because it fulfills all the needs assessments, but I just think the room might be useful to kind of understand some of the background. I think that might be quite useful, Mr. Chairman, if that makes sense.
Paul Weston, if you could take the first elements about how the costs were built up, please.
Yeah, yes, of course. Thanks, Councillor. The way I started the project was to look at what the needs assessment was as if it were a new build, and how could we relate that to the existing building. And the tricky bit of the problem was the existing building at the moment has a first floor, but those of you know it well will know that there's very little accommodation on this first floor. There's a spectator gallery and a very, very small gym and a seating area. So the building really is not working as effectively as it can on 2 levels. So you're right, option A was concentrated really on the works coming out of the condition survey. What did we need to do to give it a 25-year life? But to the customer, it would look very, very similar. The ceilings will look different and some paintwork would be better. A lot of the stuff, it would be stuff that you wouldn't see in terms of the plant and equipment. That would be replaced, but you wouldn't see that. Option B, as you know, the gym is at the moment very small gym on the first floor, and then there's a bit of a repurposed squash court at the moment, which gives you your 31 stations. So in option B, the gym is formed by knocking the 4 squash courts together and forming a mezzanine. So that's quite a considerable bit of work, but that gives you the floor area that you need. And that part of the building actually would look quite different, but only that part of the building. It's the bits that join it all together, which still would look the same. If I go then to option B plus, that then starts to bring in the sort of very small cafe and an improvement of the entrance, because I think you'll all agree the entrance is pretty disappointing at the moment. And so, and then actually then do a conversion of the male and female wet change to make that into a changing village. So that would deal more with family use and dealing with non-binary users in the future. Then option C then that pulls together all the other remaining parts of the building, which there are many areas of the building. One, as an example, in option C, is an option then to actually get rid of the major boiler house building, which is standing outside and is fairly unsightly, and move the boilers inside the building. But option C, to create studios of 200 square meters, which is really needed to meet modern needs, there is nowhere in that existing building at the moment where you can do a conversion. The way I have done it is using the area where the existing learner pool is, and if you like, building a structure within it, and then converting the main pool so that has a movable floor. So you've got both, you can do both swimming lessons and lane swimming in that. There's all sorts of benefits there because it also removes this very high building, and it will actually help in energy savings. So that's why there's quite a difference in price between B plus and C. But there's lots of other side benefits in terms of long-term use. I don't know whether David wants to comment on the other aspects of that, if that's acceptable.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so in terms of the business planning side of it, basically option A, we wouldn't expect to do much better than the surface was doing in 1920. Obviously, things will be a lot tidier and cleaner. So from that point of view, you should be able to attract the same customers as you did before. Although one thing I'd like to stress that on all of these options and business plans, we have actually factored in the fact you're going to have to relaunch this centre. So you're going to be starting from ground zero on memberships and things like swimming lessons. So all of the options factor in the fact it's going to take you 9 months to a year to get them back up and running fully. And there's marketing expenditure that reflects that. Option B is effectively your health and fitness capacity, which will improve the financial performance. B plus, the main difference is the additional studio place. And I think option C, you would just describe as wow factor, I think, which the other options wouldn't really have. So you would have the appearance of a new build as near as you can get, similar to the 1NK in North Ickenham, North Kesteven, for those who visited it. So, from I suppose thinking from a political point of view, where you guys are sitting, where there's been all of this talk for a number of years about a new leisure centre, option C would in effect look as if you're as near as possible to actually delivering that. The other options, the public externally wouldn't see massive differences to that building. But obviously there's a significant difference around the capital costs. So there is a cost to your wow factor, if you like, by introducing option C.
Mr. Rushton, can I push you on the demand figures? You've used the baseline in the report, which I presume are figures provided by One Life. Is that what you use to produce your demand forecasts?
No.
Or is it you rip those up and you start with a blank sheet of paper?
I think I covered this right at the beginning, but it was a long time ago. Basically, the success or otherwise financially of a leisure facility on the income side is dependent on health and fitness income, swimming income, and swimming lesson income. Those are the three key components that will determine the financial performance of any leisure centre. So what we do for each of those income streams, we do it on the basis of a demand analysis. I think we call it latent demand, which takes into account a catchment area. And in the case of Deepings, we've looked at 20 minutes drive time to the centre. And what the potential is on the health and fitness side is for members, what the potential is on the swimming lesson times for pupils, and also swimming. We then deduct effectively the existing provision. So that on the health and fitness side, there is private sector provision that's already in place. So we would deduct that from our model, and then we would come up with a demand for members, demand for swimming lesson pupils, demand for casual swimming. That's why when we were initially working on this project, looking at much larger facilities, at one point we did want some modelling on a 50-metre pool, if you remember, and a 8-lane 25-metre pool. What that was telling us is, yeah, you've got plenty of space for more swimming lessons, but there actually wouldn't be the demand in an area like Deepings. So, the same facility, if you were to plonk it in Nottingham or in Peterborough, would give a very different financial return because of the demand for those activities within the area. So to simply answer the question, the income figures are drawn up on those 3 key income generating areas on the basis of catchment area and demand.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Paul Fellows.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to go back to the notion of the lease, but without a lease, are we not just doing what kids all over the country are doing at present, going through the Argos catalogue and picking out what they want for Christmas? And to that ends, and again, sorry to bring it down to basic level, but it is getting a bit late. If my aunt had got, she'd be my uncle, and I'm not going to finish that one. So if essentially a new build is almost at this point not sensible, if the refurbishment of the Landis site is completely off the table, then if there is an agreement that our sensible way forward is the best refurbishment of the present building that we can do, would not a sensible way to go is to look at the finances, what can we afford? Because I'm sure that Mr. Westwood is completely capable of taking what money's on the table and coming up with the best possible option that we can have. But as a part of that, I would also like to suggest that we actually get into conversations with the Anthem Trust. Why would they not want to come on board with the development programme? Why would they not want to have a say in the facilities that will make their school a better school? What's the point, without being rude, of me sitting in here looking at a whole pile of details of which I can nod at all of them, but if I have no knowledge of what is required, I can add nothing to that conversation. So therefore, why do we not engage with other stakeholders, certainly the Anthem Trust, to the notion of, do you want to come on board with us? They're going to go to the expense of hiring a temporary hall so they can do their examinations. If they think that what they're going to get in the future will fit their needs, why would they not come on board with us and do that? We could also look at other stakeholders. So I don't wish to be negative, but I think we are actually where we're at, and a refurb of the building that is there could be a really great thing for the Deepings in the area. And what I'm positively moved by is the fact that I think all of us want a leisure facility in the Deepings.
Thank you for those comments. Karen Bradford, did you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome afternoon, members. Just hopefully I can just help a little bit there. In 1.22 of the report, it actually does go through what the needs analysis is. And that's, and I think Paul and David have made reference to that, and I think Karen has as well. So when you're doing a project like this, you do look at the demographics of the area, the growth of the area, understanding what facilities are needed in the area. There's a full list in the report. In reference to your comments around the Anthem Trust, of course, use the playing fields. They also use the sports hall and they use the swimming pool. And of course, that's what we are seeking to look to provide in the options which you're considering today in the refurbishment programme. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Okay, are there any other questions in the room? Councillor Beister.
Thank you. When I finish these comments, please don't say your comments are noted or you make an interesting observation. I'd rather you ask the people that the questions that are directed to answer the questions. That's what scrutiny is about. With regard to the proposal from Paul Weston, can I ask the question again? When he was looking, or when the organisation was looking at the new build on Lynchfield Road and the new build at Lansley Skier, why didn't he say then, why didn't he make a recommendation then to this council that, hang on a minute, I've just done an almost identical centre in North Hykeham, it's brilliant, it's much less. That could have saved him and us a lot of time and effort if we were going to end up here anyway. With regard, without going into the pink papers, the costs in the pink papers of the option A, the so-called basic refurbishment, look much, much higher than the 1.5 million that the County Council Condition Survey originally stated. So I'd like to understand what we get on top. So I think a lot of people in the Deepings think you could reopen the centre by fixing the roof and fixing the heating. And the cost of that is generally agreed to be about 1.2 million. So why can't we just do that? Even if we did it first and then did the super duper refurbishment afterwards, why can't we do the minimum in the minimal possible time in order to get the centre open so that we can go swimming and badminton and taekwondo, martial arts again? So what is the cost and the timescale of a basic, an option A minus, if you like? The school, if we do a refurbishment rather than a new build, what will be the arrangement with the school? I understand from some of the briefings we've had that the school would have no longer any hold over the swimming pool, but they would want to use the sports hall. So how it would still be a partnership? How would that partnership be managed so that the school don't once again push us out until 4 o'clock in the afternoon? We've got a shared car park as well as anything else, and all these sixth formers arrive in their cars. How do we manage the cost of maintaining and using the car park, for example? Is that something that would be negotiated within the famous lease? What would happen to the school field arrangements? Because I think it's mentioned in here that we're talking about the income from the school fields. Are we only talking about a lease on the leisure centre, or are we also talking about continuing to manage the school fields? And how does that affect the income? If we go ahead with a refurbishment, A, B plus 1, C, D, E and F of the refurbishment of the existing centre, how will it be phased? Will it be, right, we're going to do it all up and then we'll have a great big ribbon to cut and we'll get a famous person to come? Maybe we could do it on the same day as the Margaret Thatcher statue and get the same celebrity to cut the ribbon on both. But when we cut the ribbon on the Deepings Leisure Centre, will that be done when the whole thing is finished and then we let the customer in? Or is there a way of doing it where we get the pool open first and then we do all the decoration later on? And finally, I'd like to challenge the arithmetic of Mr. Weston. He's talked about going back to basics and seeing what the demand is. I don't think that the existing leisure centre would have passed using the methodology that he is proposing. Did he take into account that we in the Deepings have the second busiest leisure centre, one of the most popular, I'm not sure if it's the most popular, but certainly nearly the most popular swim school? We had over 1,000 kids using 1,000 children using the swim school all the time. We had one of the most successful swim clubs in the area, and I believe that the Deepings Leisure Centre, for all its faults, was punching way above its weight. Furthermore, we've got Peterborough on a doorstep, and as the Councillor Cook has said, they're now ditching their plans for a leisure centre, so there's another chunk of latent demand. Was all that taken into account when we were looking at the options? And I still never got an answer to what happened to the capital receipts that were originally going to fund the new centre. if I might say, I read Alan Sugar's biography, and he said that whenever he was launching a new product, he would have an ordinary version, a super duper expanded version, and then he'd have a kind of deluxe in the middle, knowing that everybody would go for the one in the middle. I think that's what we're being bounced into here.
Thank you for your questions there, and thanks for the challenge to get me to ask you to note the comments, but I will take the questions. The first question, there were 6 questions there. Why wasn't this the refurb suggested earlier? I'll pass that to Mr. Weston.
Well, I did. I prepared a refurb options in 2013 to the council. That's the answer to that question.
Yes, but then we sat and we thought about it for a while, and then in 2017 we said no, we're going to do a new leisure centre, and then new officers arrived, and you were invited again to come back. Why, when you first arrived on site, having been invited back in 2019, why wasn't the first conversation, hang on a minute, why don't you refurbish the old leisure centre like we told you to in 2013?
Mr. Weston.
I think one of the issues there was, of course, you could build the new build while you kept the existing centre in operation, so you had continuity of use. Otherwise, you would have ended up having to close that centre whilst you did the work. The other issue is, if I could just interject, that a new build would, in terms of its design life and life cycle costs, would always be your first choice, because as David Rushton would support in terms of looking at them as an investment opportunity. So I think I've been quite clear and open with the work that I've done.
Thank you. If I can move you to the other questions, I think the other question is the cost and time scale of an A-, if you can kind of comment on that.
Well, I'd like the councillor to be very specific about what the design life of an A- would be. We were asked to based on a 25-year life, and that is the judgment then that we've used in terms of selection of materials, how long they will last. And so there's an A-, one has to decide what materials you're going to use and how much you're going to patch it and how often you'll be then maintaining it and maintain it again over even a 5-year period. So it comes back to the parameters of the work that was done. The work that we did for option A was based on the new conditions survey that was done, which produced a lot more evidence-based information than the one that was produced before that you've referred to.
Okay, thank you. I'll just move you to the other questions. Karen, if you can comment on the agreement with the school.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the proposal at the moment is that the lease would include the land, the leisure centre building and the playing fields as a whole. In terms of the arrangements with the school still need the use of the sports hall and the playing fields during the day term time, but it's the proposal that they would make a payment for that. So the rest of the leisure facility would be open to community use, and that includes the swimming pool, which has obviously been a lacking community facility, as we know. We're proposing that alongside the heads of terms and the lease, there'll be a service level agreement with the school, which we're currently developing, and that will detail the payments and how they'll be calculated. And that will not be just in relation to the facilities that you're using, there'll also be an appropriate allowance for maintenance of the car park, which, as you say, is a shared facility.
And any phasing of the delivery?
Yes, that's certainly something we could look at. The costs at the moment are predicated on the work would all be done at once. If we get a preferred option and we get into early conversation with the marketplace, when we price this, we can look at the options around phasing. Obviously, that will probably, in all probability, add some cost in, but obviously that would be a conversation and a decision for members to make further on down the line.
Okay, and the final question I have, I think should have been directed to Mr. Rushton, which is the methodology of demand. If I can add in some questions that Councillor Moran submitted before, was the extent of the catchment area considered in demand? What was the extent? And what was transport facilities and future transport development? Was that considered in consideration of determining the demand for the centre? Mr. Rushton.
Yeah, so the catchment area used was a 20 minutes drive time. And we looked at both current population and future population projections, because obviously we need to think about if there was going to be an increase in under 11s in the next 10 years, then that will have an impact on demand for swimming lessons. So yeah, that was the methodology. What was the sub question around that?
Just a deeper understanding of the methodology to come up with the demand.
Yeah, well, it's as I explained, we basically look at a 20-minute travel time, and that's done using a mapping tool that we have, and that obviously is sensitive to road links. So if you've got a travel time in Stamford, for example, which is very close to the A1, the shape of the catchment area will be very different to Deeping. So it takes into account the roads. It then takes into account the demographics of the population. That has a significant impact on things like swimming lessons, because swimming lessons is determined by the number of largely under 11s that there are in the district. Similar with health and fitness, it's the 21 to 45 age group, which are the sort of core users of health and fitness facilities. And then, as I mentioned before, effectively we do an estimate of met demand through, in some cases, South Kesteven's own facilities, neighbouring councils, and private sector. So that's sort of deducted, and then you end up with a balance, which is the demand. There was a question about you were saying about how well the Deepings was doing, punching above its weight, and none of our projections are saying that the centre will take less than it did before on any of the options. What I was trying to say is it's going to take a year or so to get there, in terms of when the centre opens, whether it be option A or C. It's going to take a while to get those members back in, to get those swimming lesson customers back in. But when they're in a steady state, all of the options will be taking the same or more income than the previous Deepings operation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stevens.
I'd just like to say that when we're looking at these options, I'd just like to sort of have a lot of us have talked about the swimmers in Deeping and the clubs that are in Deeping and so on. I'd just like to say something for the non-users of leisure centres in the Deepings. And I'd like to see when we do, if we do a refurb of the centre, that we make it as attractive as possible for people who are not very likely to use a leisure centre, because I think it's them that may well benefit from it most. So I think, if you do a basic, you'll probably get avid swimmers. Unfortunately, Simon Hoppy was unable to speak to us earlier on. He's actually in Dubai, and the technology didn't work, but he is a triathlete. And so he will use the swimming pool. He'll go wild swimming, he'll do all that kind of thing. But there are a lot of people in Deeping who could do, myself included, could do with using a leisure centre. So I think we ought to consider those people, because it's those people probably we need to be thinking about in terms of the facility that we can offer. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee? Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. Just to widen the thought a little, where does the consideration of Deeping leave Stamford, Grantham and Bourne? And you'll not be surprised that I say Bourne, because they've got the same problems. The roof leaks, the boiler is as old as the one in Deeping, and the fluoridation system is inadequate. So I know they're going to have some temporary repairs over the winter, but that's not the answer. Whereas Stamford, Grantham and Bourne refurbishments stand now.
Karen?
Yes, thank you. I'll just clarify if I can, because Bourne Leisure Centre was actually opened in the 1990s. So yes, the installations are old, but they're not as old as the ones in the deep ends. At the council meeting on the 2nd of September, you'll remember that there was a budget assigned to officers to bring forward the refurbishment options. We've not utilised the whole of that budget. So we've just had an officer delegated decision signed off. And I'm pleased to say that we are in the process of commissioning full building condition surveys on the 3 remaining leisure centres, so Grantham, Mears, Stamford and Bourne, which will identify the condition and the works that the council need to do. And then hopefully from that we'll be able to build asset management plans that will dictate the level of work needed within the next 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 15 years on those 3 centres.
Okay, are there any other questions and comments on the report in the room? Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So item 5.6, this is the most interesting paragraph from a financial perspective in the report, in that these numbers are not in the current medium-term financial plans. I'd just like Richard and Adam to talk a little bit more about the savings that would need to be made, or the revenue that would need to be gained to offset these sorts of levels. Sure, earlier on we spoke of a new leisure centre. We gave new leisure centre plenty of opportunity to discuss that, and the changes were absolutely stark. I mean, we would totally transform with dramatic frontline cut services. I'd like to be given a little bit more assurances that these are easier to swallow. My second question is to Mr. Weston about the building costs. I see that you've incorporated some figures for inflation. I have increasing concerns about inflation, because inflation, what I can see, seems to be absolutely everywhere, apart from in government statistics. And so I'd like to understand what inflation impact onto this you have modelled, and how that may run away from us, and where we could value engineer the project down if need be. And third, I'd like to call upon the leader just to present to us what his preferred approach is. And basically sell us the preferred approach. What is the preferred approach of these interests, where the return on investment is quite similar? Actually, the investment is not hugely different. I'd just like to have a bit of a sales pitch from the leader as to where he's going from this. So if we can start with Richard and Adam about demonstration of affordability, please. Richard.
Okay, so yeah, as you say in paragraph 5.5, the range of the financial implications are laid out there. These are slightly loaded disproportionately because as David and Paul have both said, this prolongs the life of the asset by 25 years. The new build is a 50-year life, whereas the refurbishment of the existing asset is 25. So clearly what that does is put more pressure on the borrowing profile, because it's over a shortened period of time. So it is disproportionately affected in that way. And as has been previously said, you can see the scale of C is about 90% again of A in terms of the scale of the capital spend. In terms of if you contextualise that down to council tax, as we did similarly for the new build, that gives you a range of £7.06 for option A, £8.32 for B, £9.96 for B plus, and £13.14 on option C. That's per bandy property for 25 years additional. And as we've already said, there is a referendum cap of £5. So that would lead to the council having a trade-off between what it would allow the council tax increase to be, how much that increase it would want to push towards offsetting those costs, and those difficult choices about how it would restructure its budgets. And as Chairman says, this isn't about necessarily cutting services. This is about reshaping how we deliver services, how we could generate other sources of income, how we could drive efficiency and transformation. So it doesn't necessarily translate into services being draconianly cut, but clearly that is still an option available to the council. What this also doesn't include, and I think David did reference it, is obviously we've got in the modelling there are surplus income surpluses that have been generated from the income profiles of each of those options. This doesn't include any assumptions around that income generation being used to offset these costs. So clearly, again, as you go up the scale, that surplus generation increases each time as you introduce more of that needs assessment into those different offers. So that would be a contributory factor towards offsetting those costs. If I can, because Councillor Baxter's referenced it a couple of times in terms of St Martin's Park, I believe the receipts are still commercially sensitive, so I won't say what that figure is, but clearly there is still the debt attached to the acquisition of St Martin's Park when it was acquired back in the day that needs to be dealt with, because that's been temporarily internally borrowed at the moment. So there's a demand on the receipts to deal with that debt. There's also this scheme, whichever one is agreed to, that needs to be considered. There is also the ongoing capital programme of the council. General fund capital programme is ordinarily around £6 million. The council's forecast on its capital reserves is only about 1.3 projected to be remaining by 2023. So there are competing pressures on how those receipts, when they are received, are allocated out to deal with not only this priority, but also the ongoing capital priorities and the legacy arrangement that we've got with the purchase of the Cummings site as it was then. And members will be aware there are conversations around another project coming forward around a significant capital investment requirement if it goes forward, which would need to be considered alongside it. So I think all of that is to be played for, but it's putting pressures on those receipts to be dealt with in the way that's the optimum advantage to the council. Thank you.
Councillor Stokes, do you want to comment on some of the political choices on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, to facilitate this in any budget, we're going to have to make decisions, and decisions will be made by full council. Obviously, it's not going to be an easy decision. I mean, it's looking at new ways of working as well. So, I mean, it's any new money put into the revenue budget is going to have an impact. And it's all about the decisions that we make as a council going forward.
Mr. Weston, if you can comment upon contingencies and inflations that are in the numbers and whether there's scope for value engineering should that run away.
Yes, I mean, I believe you wouldn't want me to mention the exact figures in the paper, but the contingency allowance at this stage is 10%. Which you would normally have at this very early stage of design. And then as you gradually work through the risks on the project, you would expect that contingency figure to reduce. So that 10% contingency is common to options A, B, B plus and C. The calculations for inflation, just to repeat, it's a national service. The Building Cost Information Service is part of the RICS, Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and obviously they're feeding in information they're getting from the industry all the time. So this is a thing that gets revisited on a monthly basis. So in order to arrive at the inflation figures that are in all the budget cost estimates, I've made an estimate of when start on site would be, and for all the options, I've assumed start on site would be the first quarter of 2023. So if that can be brought forward, then that will help. If you're looking at, if you like, the different complexities of the schemes, perhaps there's a town planning aspect to options B plus and C, but otherwise the other options wouldn't be subject to planning approval. But the contract periods are different because the scheme are more complex. So, for instance, option A, I'd assume that would be completed within a year. That'd be completed in the fourth quarter of 2023. Whereas option B, the one with the works to form the gym by knocking all the squash courts together, I've assumed that's the second quarter of 2024. Sorry if this is going on, but I think it's helpful to explain. Whereas option B plus, I've assumed the same as the second quarter of 2024. But option C, the full remodel and refurbishment, is third quarter of 2024. So what I'm trying to say is the inflation is based on the midpoint of those different programs. So if you can bring forward the lead-in time and start on site earlier, and if contractors during the early stage negotiation can say that they can build it in a faster time, then that will have a considerable bearing on what we've allowed for in the estimates for inflation. And that's before you've talked about, if you like, value engineering, which is looking at different specifications and what you alternatives that what you might do to actually reduce build costs. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. And if we can, I'll circle around again. Callum, if you could just make a few comments. We're running out of time, so if you just make a few comments before we go to a vote on this. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chairman, and not to predetermine obviously the discussion and the decision that you're going to take. I mean, when I became leader, I think in my opening speech, I revised the plans for our leisure, and I commented that we would start with the deepings, and then obviously look at all the other facilities, which is obviously where Karen Whitfield has already alluded to in terms of the surveys on all the other buildings. I mean, for me, if we're going to have a bit of ambition, then it will be option C. And that was discussed with the Cabinet. It would deliver everything that a new centre would. It would protect the services in the south of the district, not just the deepings, because it's not just the deepings that use it, for at least 25 years. I think we've got to go through the process. We've got to go through the specifications. We've got to go through the costings. Obviously, as Cabinet and as Council, we'll have to determine the final outcome in terms of the savings that we will have to bring forwards, and prioritising our budget in terms of leisure. And leisure is a priority of this Council, and that's always been. I know I always use the line that, most districts don't have 4 leisure centres. They have much less than that, but we have 4. And the residents are quite proud of those facilities. Obviously, Rich has already alluded to certain returns on St Martin's Park, and that is true. And obviously, I'm not going to disclose the amount, but we are making significant returns on that. For the south of the district, I think it is a priority in terms of the offer that we provide in terms of leisure. We all know down the line, we've got devolution, we've got local government reorganisation. Not to scare anyone, but I suppose, if we did have a new council, would their priority be in investing in a leisure centre in the deepings? I don't know. So for me, we need to make that decision. I think we need to make the opportunity to invest. And it's not just saving the Deepings Leisure Centre, it's actually improving it and improving the offer and the facility and actually the access that the public have to this facility, because I think for a long time, public have not had the access and the use of that facility. So anything that we can do to improve health and wellbeing and sports and fitness is absolutely vital. Obviously, I'm not predetermining the discussion and the debate you're going to have, but I would like to put on my records the thanks to the officers for working so expeditely and professionally on this report, getting it to this meeting today. I know Karen Whitfield has done an extensive amount of work for which we are in your debt, and also to our external advisors as well that have joined us. I would like to pay tribute to them and thank them for the work that they've put forward into this.
Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say as well that I would be in favour of option C for the following reasons. It brings more revenue, more studio space, it's got varying pool depths and so on. But the most important reason for me is the residents of the Deepings and also its wider community. We owe them a lot more than a lick of paint and some fresh water in the pool and a bit of a patch up. At this point, I'd like to thank the residents for their patience and thank them for their understanding in this difficult 5 months since the closure. Option C is a comprehensive report, to which also I'd like to thank the officers for bringing it to us today. And for these reasons, we should give the Deepings the best leisure centre that is possible in these COVID times where private sector partnerships are more difficult to secure. Thank you.
Okay, we are running out of time here. If there are any other comments, I'd like to do some closing comments and then move towards a recommendation vote. You've all spoken before, but I'll give you 30 seconds to make some closing comments. Councillor Whittington.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was actually going to propose that we make propose that we extend by 15 minutes, just so we're not rushed, till 5:15. If anybody wants to second that, just so we're not rushed.
Is there anybody that's prepared to second that vote? Councillor Ashley Baxter. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That is an extension of 15 minutes. Thank you for that. As I say, I would like to move towards a recommendation vote. If there's no other comments from anybody who's not spoken, then as I say, just some concluding comments from Councillor Baxter. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Right, if somebody's going to put a recommendation for a refurbishment of a centre and the leader and Councillor Robbins have been minded to say option C, I would say, what consultation has taken place with anyone in the Deepings other than the councillors, the ward councillors, about those options? Because I don't think that anyone has been consulted, not maybe the school, but not the sports teams nor anyone else. If you're going to present option C, then I would try and put something around it that we're not fixed in stone to those options, so that we're not nailing our colours to the mast and say, you said option C and option C says no learner pool, so there will be no learner pool. I think that while we're negotiating with the Department for Education, there is time for us to do some local consultation so that the people of the Deepings can either give us a round of applause for the great work we've done, or they can say, well, actually, we like option C, but is there any chance that we could add a bit on here or take a bit off there? External cladding, no external cladding, because there's an awful lot of detail that we haven't mentioned in this meeting at all. So I'm saying that if we're proposing option C, which is the most expensive of the refurbishment options, then we need to consult the community, as we should have done since 2017, to make sure that we get it right. So I'd like to add that on if anybody is recommending that. In terms of closing comments, I would say that we really have been sold a pup since 2017, if not before, about the promise of a new leisure centre. The Deepings were promised a new leisure centre, and we are where we are now. I understand that, but I just feel absolutely appalled, and I think that Councillor Dobson was confusing a look of smugness with a look of fury mixed with disappointment for the way that the people of the Deepings have been betrayed over the last five years.
Councillor Baxter, I'll ask you to withdraw those comments. The look of the personal attacks here. We've asked you to comment on respectfully.
Councillor Dobson.
Point of order. Councillor Baxter is now in direct. He's now breaching Section 1 of the new Members' Code of Conduct.
Councillor Dobson said.
Alan Robinson.
As Councillor Whittington says, the Code of Conduct asks us to give respect to each other and the way we behave in meetings. And obviously, some of the language used is we need to think about our language and the tone that we use when we're working together in this chamber.
I'll move on. I will take the question about consultation, but we'll get the concluding comments first. Councillor.
First thing I'd like to say is thank Penny Robbins for what she just said about the people of Deepings. They have been very patient, and it's fair to say that without their passion and support of thousands of local residents, I've got no doubt that the original recommendation to permanently close the Deepings Leisure Centre that went to Cabinet and walk away would already have been implemented. So, and also just on the a point that hasn't really been touched on, unless I've been asleep, is procurement, the actual method of procuring any work that we're going to recommend. So I'll just leave that one with you. But concluding remarks, Councillor Whittington is actually quite right when he said Deepings people have been badly let down. In fact, they have been lied to and they've been betrayed over this whole thing. This council was told by the experts we've heard today in 2013 that without major work to the leisure centre in Deepings, it would close in 2016. Nothing was done apart from the fact that we lost £124,000 a year in support from LCC. We rolled over, but North Kestervan, in a similar situation, said no way, and they kept their money, and they've been able to fund their refurb. We were then promised the 3 leisure centres and the upgrades of the other ones.
I think we're in repetition at the moment.
I'm not in repetition at all. I haven't said this and I haven't heard it said, Mr. Chairman. I'd just appreciate if you just give me a couple more minutes just to finish this. They are concluding remarks.
30 seconds, closing remarks, Councillor Dilts.
The leader toured the, you haven't heard this today, the then leader toured all the leisure centres, with banners at public expense in a pre-election stunt saying new leisure centre delivered by SKDC. Well, that's why the people have been let down. We actually got people in this chamber today who were elected on election leaflets like this one that has the flagship policy, vote for us and we'll deliver you a new leisure centre. It hasn't happened. I'm coming to a conclusion, and there have been no declaration of interest by those councillors today, I'm disappointed to say. Now, when we talk about, at the start of the meeting, people talked about the Nolan principles of selfishness, honesty, integrity, accountability, and the rest. Where were the Nolan principles when we're talking to our residents? I expect our electorate to be treated with respect and the Nolan principles as well, not with broken election promises and frankly lies.
I'm going to move on. Councillor Mark Whittington. Again, if I can make your comments brief, please.
Yeah. I mean, I did say that I do believe that the residents of Deepings have been let down. I think Councillor Robbins alluded to that, and I'm quite prepared to say that I think they have over time for a variety of reasons, which is why, despite the fact that I've been through the finances in the pink papers quite extensively, and I have asked a number of questions and whatever, and I do appreciate that it is a financial stretch for this council to go to option C. And as I think as Section 141 officer has indicated, there are challenges and choices that will need to be made. However, I really do think that we do owe it to the residents of the Deepings to deliver the best possible leisure centre that we can in the circumstances where we are now, not historically, not what was that may or may not have been, but that was promised. We're now in the financial reality of November 2021. We're a completely different financial world than we were pre-COVID 2017. That's a fact. If you do any research into any of the financial pages of any of the newspapers, you will see that. So on that basis, Mr. Chairman, I am quite prepared to see that this council, that we do stretch financially, we do support option C, and we do deliver the people of Deepings a leisure centre they can be proud of, and this council.
Thank you for those closing comments. Before we move to a recommendation, there were 2 points in there that I'd like to hear an answer on. What consultation was there in the community, or are these options subject to consultation in the community? And are we following standard procurement processes? Karen Whitfield.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think we need to acknowledge that these proposals are subject to consultation going forward. I won't talk too long on it, but it's always very difficult to go to community consultation with no parameters, because you'd get 200 or 2,000 different options, and we can't move at pace and develop refurbishment schemes by committee or by community. And just on the point about procurement, obviously, once we get a steer from this meeting today, we can do some more detailed work about routes to market, and we'd expect that information to be available at the next cabinet meeting.
Okay, Councillor Dobson, you want to add some quick closing comments to that before we move to a recommendation?
Thank you. I'd just like to bring up the point that Councillor Dilks was a county councillor for the Deepings from 2001, 2005, 2005 to 2009. And 2013 to 2017. And it was 2014, just 2014 is when we lost the money from council. So I don't know whether it's fair in him pointing out.
Okay, I'd like to bring us back to the agenda.
It's amazing, it's my fault.
Order. I'd like to bring us back to the agenda, please. Just finally, Councillor Rice-Oxley's requested to speak. Thank you.
So it's just a question about the recommendation.
Councillor Rice-Oxley.
Yes, just a question about the recommendations. We're going to vote on one of the refurbishment options. So just your point about 5.6 and 5.7 about, so we cannot currently demonstrate affordability, and it's imperative that the council undertakes a review of its spending priorities. So is the recommendation, is this the ambition, understanding that a review of spending is going to take place? Is that what, are we committing the council to doing something, or are we saying this is the recommendation, understanding that we can't currently demonstrate affordability for it and that we need to undertake a review?
I believe Councillor Stokes, do you want to comment on that, this recommendation? Or Alan Roberts?
So just for clarity, obviously we're not making the decision today. We're making recommendations to Cabinet, which I think will then go on to the full council for a final decision. So we're not at the point of making a final decision today. We're making recommendations based on the debate we've heard.
Okay, do we have a recommendation in the room? Councillor Mark Whittington, your recommendation, please.
My recommendation is that we recommend to council that we adopt option C, and that we also include in the previous recommendation that we passed earlier as well. Thank you.
The what, sorry, the second?
The thing that we passed earlier about encouraging the Anthem Trust and Department of Education to work with all parties as well.
Okay, subject to consultation and building this into the medium-term financial review. Okay, so that is the recommendation, subject to building this into the medium-term financial plan and the public consultation as discussed. Okay, do we have a second?
Sorry, Chair, could I just ask that when you say subject to community consultation, that we add in subject to meaningful community consultation?
Okay, I'm happy for that addition. Okay, fine. Do we have somebody to second that? Councillor Dawson. Is there anybody who wants to speak on this recommendation? No. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, with that, I'll move on. Is there any other business in the room? Okay, it's 5:09. Thank you, everyone.